Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name's Richard Neven, and back in 2003, I was working as a search and rescue officer in the Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky. I didn't grow up around here, though. I came from Indiana, a flat, uneventful place where the most excitement you'd get was a speeding ticket. The move to Kentucky was supposed to bring some adventure, and let me tell you, I got more than I bargained for. When I first got into this line of work, people said it was mainly about finding lost hikers or kids who wandered off the trails. They didn't warn me about the other things in the woods, the things you can't categorize. You see, I wasn't exactly what you'd call an experienced outdoorsman before I took this job. The closest I got to wildlife was grilling burgers in my backyard. But the forest grew on me. It felt like freedom. That was until the day it stopped feeling safe. It was mid-afternoon when the call came in. 2 campers, both young men, had gone missing near Red River Gorge. They had set out the previous morning and hadn't checked back with their friends. That wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. People lose track of time out here all the time. But something about the tone of the call had me on edge. Their friends said they weren't the type to just disappear without a trace. I grabbed my gear and met up with my partner, Carl, an older guy who'd been doing this longer than I'd been alive. He had that look of someone who'd seen it all but didn't say much about it. As we drove out to the trailhead, Carl kept tapping the wheel like he had something on his mind. Finally he said, "You ever hear about that thing up in the gorge?" I glanced at him. "What thing?" He didn't answer right away. "Never mind," he muttered. "Just some stories the locals like to tell to scare tourists." We pulled up to the trailhead where we met the friends of the 2 missing campers. They were all rattled, wide-eyed and shuffling nervously like something bad had already happened. One of them, a guy with a red bandana wrapped around his head, said they had been hiking together when the 2 missing guys went ahead, wanting to explore a cave they'd found. The rest of the group stayed back, and when their friends didn't return by nightfall, they started worrying. Carl, never one for comforting words, just grunted and motioned for me to follow him. We set out on the trail, winding through dense trees and jagged cliffs. The forest was quiet, too quiet. You start to notice these things when you've been out here long enough. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the wind and our footsteps crunching on the dirt. "Shouldn't there be, some wildlife or something?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Carl didn't respond, just picked up the pace, which wasn't exactly reassuring. About an hour in, we found the campsite the missing campers had set up. Tents were there, unzipped, sleeping bags tossed around like they'd left in a hurry. A couple of backpacks were strewn across the ground. What was strange, though, was that there were no signs of a struggle, just an eerie sense of abandonment. I crouched down near one of the backpacks, rifling through it for clues. Inside, I found the usual camping gear. But then I pulled out something odd, a torn piece of fur. It was coarse, thicker than anything I'd seen on a bear or deer. I showed it to Carl, but he just shrugged it off, mumbling something about wild animals. As we moved further into the forest, the trees began to close in around us, their twisted limbs casting distorted shadows on the ground. I felt like we were being watched, like something was out there just beyond the tree line. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to look, nothing was there. About half a mile later, we came across something that made my blood run cold. One of the missing campers was slumped against a tree, his body mangled beyond recognition. His torso was torn open, jagged cuts running along his chest and arms, as if something had sliced him up with claws or teeth. There was no blood on the ground, though, which made it even more unsettling. Whatever did this didn't just kill him, it took its time. I staggered back, feeling bile rise in my throat. Carl knelt down to examine the body, his face grim but not surprised. "This isn't normal," he muttered. "No kidding," I whispered. "What could have done this?" Carl stood up slowly, scanning the area. "Not sure, but we need to find the other one." The other one. Right, there were two. I had almost forgotten. My mind was still reeling from the sight in front of me. But we had a job to do. We pressed on, following a faint trail of broken branches and disturbed underbrush. It was getting darker, but we couldn't turn back now. About an hour later, we found the second camper, or at least what was left of him. His body was hanging from a tree, suspended by a mess of vines and branches. It looked like he'd been lifted up and shredded apart, his limbs dangling at odd angles. I could barely breathe at this point. It was like we had stumbled into some twisted hunting ground. "We should call this in," I said, my voice shaking. Carl didn't move. He was staring at something off to the side, just beyond the body. "Look." I followed his gaze and saw it, movement in the trees. Something was crouching low, its shape barely visible in the shadows. It was huge, larger than anything I'd ever seen before. Its body was covered in matted fur, like that of a wild boar, but its movements were more feline, smooth and predatory. The creature's head was elongated, almost like a wolf's, but it had this strange twisted quality to it, as if nature had gone wrong somewhere. It stood there for a moment, staring at us, before letting out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in my chest. Carl grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my daze. "Run!" This happened in late December, the week before Halloween. My name is Clara Reynolds, and I'm 32 years old. I've spent the past 2 years living out of my RV, documenting my travels across the Midwest for my blog, Roadside Reveries. It's not the life I imagined for myself, certainly not the one I was planning with my fiancée, but it's where I've ended up. Some days it feels like healing, other days it feels like running. That week, I decided to camp at Mystery Cave State Park in southern Minnesota. I'd read about its underground cave systems and miles of pine-covered trails, and it seemed like the perfect blend of beauty and solitude. I thought I'd get some good photos, write a couple of posts, and enjoy the quiet. I was wrong. When I pulled into the park visitor center, the parking lot was nearly empty. A grizzled park ranger with a grey beard and a stained uniform sat behind the desk, sipping coffee from a thermos. He looked up when I walked in and gave me a polite nod. "Afternoon. What can I do for you?" "I'm here to camp for a few days," I said, setting my notebook on the counter. "I've got an RV, so I'll need a hookup spot." His brow furrowed. "You're here alone?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "You sure about that?" His eyes lingered on my face, and for a moment I thought he was going to outright tell me no. Then he sighed and reached for a map. "We're getting close to off-season," he said. "Not many folks around. You'll have most of the park to yourself, but I wouldn't recommend camping near the caves. The terrain's unstable, and there have been odd things reported." "What kind of odd things?" He hesitated. "Whispers. Shadows where there shouldn't be. Stuff that spooks people. Nothing concrete." I laughed nervously. "You get a lot of ghost stories around here? More than you'd think." He tapped the map, circling a spot near the caves. "If I were you, I'd steer clear of this area. The Pins campground is safer, and it's got a better view." I nodded, but as I walked back to my RV, I found myself drawn to the circled area. Whispers or not, I wanted to see the caves. By the time I reached the clearing near the caves, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the pines. I parked my RV, leveled it, and stepped outside to take in the view. The air was crisp and still, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling of small animals, just silence. I shook off the unease and started setting up. The site itself was beautiful, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the breeze. I cooked a quick dinner on my portable stove, then settled in with a book. That night, the whispers started. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched murmuring like voices just outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voices stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the clearing. Nothing. The forest loomed around me, dark and impenetrable. As I turned back to the RV, my light caught something on the rear window. A smudge, low to the ground, shaped like a handprint. I told myself it was condensation, a trick of the light, but deep down I knew better. The next day, I decided to hike to the caves. The whispers still nagged at the back of my mind, but I convinced myself it was my imagination. The sunlight filtering through the trees bolstered my confidence. The cave entrance was marked by a rusted metal sign that read, "Do not enter without a guide." Of course, the sign was half buried in overgrown grass, and the entrance was wide open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The air grew colder with each step, and the sound of dripping water echoed in the darkness. I switched on my headlamp, the beam cutting through the gloom. That's when I saw the plaque. It was bolted to the cave wall, weathered and faded, in memory of the children who were lost 1963. Beneath the text was a black and white photograph, 5 children smiling awkwardly at the camera, flanked by a stern-looking ranger. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what had happened to them, but I felt an undeniable pull to find out. I spent the afternoon at the visitor center's archive room, digging through old newspapers and park records. What I found made my stomach turn. The 5 children had gone missing during a school field trip in 1963. Search parties combed the caves and surrounding woods for weeks, but no trace of them was ever found. The ranger in the photo, William Graves, disappeared shortly afterward. Rumours swirled about foul play, with some accusing Graves of leading the children into the caves and abandoning them. Others whispered that the caves themselves had taken them, that something dark and ancient lurked beneath the park. I left the archives feeling a strange mix of dread and curiosity. That night, the haunting escalated. I was cooking dinner when the whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to come from all around me, weaving through the trees, brushing against the RV like the wind. "Who's out there?" I shouted, stepping outside with my flashlight. The beam swept across the trees and stopped on a figure. It was small, childlike, with glowing eyes that reflected the light. My breath caught in my throat. Then it was gone, darting behind a tree faster than anything human. I scrambled back into the RV and locked the door. My heart thundered in my chest as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I huddled in the corner, clutching a kitchen knife and praying for morning. By dawn, I'd had enough. I decided to pack up and leave. But when I turned the key in the ignition, the engine wouldn't start. I checked the battery, the cables, everything looked fine, but the RV refused to turn over. That's when I saw the footprints, dozens of them circling the RV. Small, barefoot prints, leading from the woods to the clearing and back again. I felt my stomach drop. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to let me go. I spent the day trying to find a way out. My phone had no signal, and the park radio tower was too far to reach on foot. Before nightfall, desperation drove me to hike back to the caves, hoping I could find something, anything, that might explain what was happening. The air inside the cave felt heavier this time, almost oppressive. The whispers were louder, echoing off the walls as I ventured deeper. I found an old ranger station tucked into a side tunnel. It was dilapidated, with broken furniture and mold creeping up the walls. On the desk I found a leather-bound journal. It belonged to William Graves. The journal's entries were disjointed, filled with ramblings about the voices and the children. Graves wrote about how they'd lured him into the caves with their laughter, promising him eternal life if he stayed with them. "I hear them calling me even now," one entry read. "Their voices are soft, sweet, but there is something wrong beneath the sweetness, something hungry." The final entry was scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They won't let me leave. They are not children anymore. They are something else." A noise behind me made me freeze. I turned slowly, and there he was. The figure in the doorway was tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. His uniform hung in tatters, and his hands ended in claws. "Help me," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. I stumbled backward, dropping the journal. The whispers surged around me, overlapping into a deafening cacophony. Graves lunged, and I bolted, running deeper into the caves. The passages twisted and turned, disorienting me, but I didn't stop. I burst into a chamber filled with skeletal remains. The bones were small, scattered across the floor like discarded toys. My stomach churned as I realized what I was looking at, the missing children. The whispers turned into screams as Graves appeared in the entrance, his form twisting and stretching unnaturally. I grabbed a flare from my bag, striking it with trembling hands. The chamber filled with red light, and the spirits recoiled, their outlines flickering like shadows. With a desperate cry, I threw the flare into the pile of bones. Flames erupted, consuming the remains and illuminating the chamber. Graves let out an inhuman wail, his body dissolving into ash as the fire burned brighter. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I stumbled out of the caves just as the sun began to set. My RV started without a hitch, as though nothing had ever been wrong. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a single handprint on the window, smaller than my own. I haven't been back to Mystery Cave since, and I never will. My name's Stephen Reiner, and I've been a cop in Ravenshaw, Wyoming for the better part of, well, I'm not counting anymore. Small town, small problems, right? Mostly traffic stops, the occasional domestic dispute, and once in a while a bar brawl that leaves the place smelling like old whiskey and bad decisions. Nothing I can't handle. People around here know me as the guy who can crack a joke, diffuse a situation, and still make it to Sunday dinner with my folks. But last Tuesday, that was different. It was 2012, the kind of quiet day where I was mostly concerned with who's parking their truck too close to the fire hydrant or who's double-dipping on permits for the fall hunting season. I'd just gotten back from grabbing coffee at Merle's Diner, the only spot in town with passable coffee, when dispatch called in a missing persons report. A family of tourists hadn't checked out of their rented cabin by the lake. The owner, an old guy named Earl Patterson, had tried to get in touch with them after they were 2 hours late. No answer. Most times, it's a mix-up. People think checkout is at noon when it's actually 10 a.m. But Earl was jittery on the phone. I could hear him breathing heavy. Earl's usually laid back, grumbles a lot, but never nervous. I figured I'd take a drive up there to see what was going on. Ravenshaw's got a lake, sure, but we're not exactly a tourist trap. Anyone from out of town stands out. The cabin itself is about 15 miles into the woods, isolated and quiet. It's the kind of place people rent when they want to forget the world exists for a weekend. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find something no one was going to believe. The drive up was uneventful. The sky had this overcast thing going on, and the wind was whipping through the trees, giving the woods an eerie vibe. I wasn't thinking much of it, just another day in a small-town cop's life, I figured. When I pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something odd. The door was ajar, not wide open, but not locked either. I stepped out of my cruiser, hand on my belt, and made my way to the porch. "Anyone home?" I called, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. It smelled wrong, like the place hadn't been aired out in weeks. There was something else, too, something that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't place it right away. The cabin was empty. No bags, no sign of life. I made my way through the kitchen and glanced at the half-eaten sandwiches on the table. Looked like someone had been in the middle of lunch when they decided to drop everything and walk out. Not normal, but not enough to start sounding alarms. And then I saw it. In the living room there was a trail of mud, if it was mud, leading to the back door. I followed it, noticing how the prints seemed too large, too irregular. They didn't look like boots or bare feet. No, it was something else entirely, something animal, maybe. Out back, the forest seemed darker than it should be for midday. Dense, looming trees stretched toward the sky, casting long shadows over the ground. I followed the prints. They led into the woods. After about 50 yards, I found something I wasn't expecting. Blood. A lot of it. Splattered across the pine needles, smeared across the rocks. But no bodies. "Jesus," I muttered, crouching down to get a closer look. My stomach churned, but I kept it together. Whatever had happened here, it was bad. Real bad. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound from deeper in the woods. Not quite a growl, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't armed with anything more than my service pistol, and let's just say I wasn't feeling confident that 6 rounds were going to cut it. Still, I pressed on. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe I should have called for backup. But out here, backup was at least 30 minutes away, and I wasn't about to let whatever was out there get too far ahead. The deeper I went into the woods, the stranger things got. Broken branches, tufts of fur snagged on bark, more of that reddish-brown smear leading me forward. I wasn't an expert tracker by any means, but this was all wrong. Nothing about this trail made sense. It was erratic, zigzagging, doubling back on itself, like whatever left it was either playing with its prey or wasn't thinking like a normal predator. That's when I found the first body, or what was left of it. The torso was mangled beyond recognition, clothes shredded, the limbs missing. Whoever it had been, they weren't just dead, they'd been torn apart. And whatever did it hadn't bothered with eating the body. It was just destruction. Pure, brutal destruction. I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. There was a rustling in the trees behind me, a movement that didn't match the wind. I turned, slow, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I saw it. Just for a split second, something huge, hunched over, crouching low to the ground, covered in matted fur. Its limbs were long and wrong, too many joints, too many angles. It vanished into the underbrush before I could even blink. I froze, gun drawn but useless. My mind raced. What the hell was I dealing with? A bear? No, bears don't tear people apart like that. Wolves, maybe? But wolves don't leave half-eaten bodies in the open. This was something else entirely. Something worse. I decided then that it was time to go. Whatever had killed that family was still out here, and I wasn't equipped to deal with it. But as I turned to head back toward the cabin, I heard a snap, a twig breaking underfoot. I wasn't alone. I barely had time to react. The thing lunged out from behind a tree, faster than anything that size had a right to be. I fired off 2 shots, more out of reflex than anything else. One hit it, but it didn't stop. I felt a sharp pain in my side as I was knocked to the ground, my gun flying from my hand. This thing was on top of me, snarling, its hot breath against my neck. I could feel its claws digging into my side, tearing at my uniform. I kicked, punched, did anything I could to get it off me, but it was like fighting a force of nature. Then, just as quickly as it had attacked, it was gone, disappearing back into the woods as if it had never been there. I lay there, gasping for air, my side bleeding, my mind racing. What the hell had just happened? I don't remember how I got back to my cruiser. Adrenaline, probably, maybe shock. By the time I made it back to town, I was pale, bleeding and shaking like a leaf in the wind. I told the chief everything, well, most of it. You can't just walk in and say a damn monster tried to rip you in half. But I showed him the blood, the wounds, and I told him about the family. We went back up there, of course, me, the chief, and 2 deputies. The bodies were still there. So was the blood. But that thing, it was gone. Vanished into the woods like a ghost. We searched for hours, called in wildlife experts. Hell, even the feds showed up. But they didn't find anything. The official report said it was a bear attack. You and I both know that's bull. Now, I'm not saying I know what I saw, because I don't. But whatever it was, it's still out there. Somewhere in the woods. My name is Charles Gonzalez. I'm 40 years old and I make my living as a wildlife photographer. This happened last year in October during what was supposed to be a career-reviving trip to Cat Lake in East Texas. I had no idea that what I'd find there would make me wish I had never gone. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near the edge of the lake. The view was surreal. Ancient cypress trees rising out of the still water, their gnarled roots submerged and draped in curtains of Spanish moss. The sun was setting, painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson. It was perfect, exactly the kind of eerie beauty I wanted for my photography exhibit, Forgotten Spirits of the South. As I set up my gear, a local woman named Darla, who owned a nearby bait shop, stopped by to chat. She was friendly but a little odd, the kind of person who seemed to know everyone's business. "You camping alone?" she asked, her tone more concerned than curious. "Yeah, just me and my camera," I said, smiling. She didn't return the smile. Be careful out there. Cat Lake's beautiful, but it's got its stories. Ever heard of the Witch of Cat Lake? I shook my head, amused. A local ghost story? Darla's expression turned serious. She's real. They say she was a healer back in the 1800s. People blamed her for every sickness, every crop failure. When a family drowned in the lake, they said it was her curse. So they tied her to a tree and let the water take her, and now she haunts the lake. She sings to you? I asked, humouring her. Darla leaned in, her voice low. She sings to you. If you hear, don't follow the sound, don't talk to her, and whatever you do, don't go out on the water after dark. I brushed off her warning as local superstition. I wasn't here for ghost stories, I was here for the perfect shot. That night I sat by the lake with my camera, hoping to capture the moonlight reflecting off the water. Around midnight, as the fog rolled in, I heard it, a faint, melodic singing, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. It seemed to come from somewhere across the lake, distant but distinct. My first thought was that it might be a bird or some other animal, but it sounded human. Curious, I aimed my camera in the direction of the sound and snapped a photo. When I checked the screen, my heart skipped. There, in the mist, was the faint outline of a figure standing in the water, a woman. But when I looked again, she was gone. The next morning, I visited Darla's bait shop to ask about the figure I'd seen. She looked at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. You saw her, didn't you? I don't know what I saw, I said, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. That's how it starts, she said, shaking her head. She lets you see her just enough to get you curious. Then she sings to you. And if you follow her out there, you'll never come back. I tried to laugh it off. You really believe that? She didn't laugh. Believe it or not doesn't matter to me. Just stay off the water after dark, Samuel. I nodded, but her words lingered as I walked out. On the way back to my RV, I passed a houseboat anchored in a quiet cove. Its owner, a man named Ethan, was sitting on the deck, smoking a cigarette. You the photographer? He called out. Yeah, I said. How'd you know? Word travels fast around here, he said, taking a drag. I heard you're asking about the witch. You believe in her too? I asked. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is people go missing out there. Take my advice and leave while you can. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was overreacting. Ghost stories, local legends. It was all just folklore, a way for people to explain things they didn't understand. I decided to head out on the water. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lake as I rowed my small rented boat toward the middle. The mist was already gathering, curling around the bases of the cypress trees like something alive. I snapped a few photos, but none of them captured the eerie beauty of the scene. Then I heard it again, the singing. It was closer this time, a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to focus on my work, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the sound grew louder. I turned the boat toward the direction of the voice, squinting through the mist. And there she was. A woman stood waist-deep in the water, her hair dark and matted, her skin pale as the moonlight. She looked up at me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to pull at my soul. "Help me," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the oars and began rowing, but the water seemed to fight against me. The boat barely moved, as if the lake itself was trying to hold me in place. "Don't leave me," she said, her voice rising in a mournful wail. I glanced back, and she was closer now, her hands reaching for the boat. Her touch was ice, sending a jolt of pain through my arm. I yelled and shoved her away, rowing with every ounce of strength I had. The mist thickened, and her wailing turned into a scream that echoed through the trees. Somehow, I broke free, the boat lurching forward as the water finally released its grip. When I reached the shore, I stumbled out, soaked and shaking. My camera was still slung around my neck, the lens fogged from the damp air. I looked back at the lake. The mist was gone, the water calm, but I knew what I'd seen. I packed up and left the next morning, ignoring the curious stares from the locals as I drove through town. I didn't stop until I was hundreds of miles away, safely parked in a rest area off the highway. When I reviewed the photos on my camera, my stomach turned. Every shot of the lake had the same figure in it, standing in the background, watching me. Her face grew clearer with each frame, until the last one showed her standing right behind me, her empty eyes locked onto mine. I deleted every photo. I never published the story, never mentioned the witch to anyone. But some nights I still hear her singing, faint and distant, like a memory I can't escape. And I'll never go back to Cat Lake. My name is Richard Whitman. I'm 49 years old, and last spring I set out on an RV road trip across the Midwest. After my divorce and losing my job, I felt like I needed to get away from the noise of the city and frankly from myself. I wanted solitude, time to think, and maybe a little peace. What I found at Pikes Peak State Park in Iowa was something else entirely, something I can't explain even now. It started like any other stop on my trip. I pulled my beat-up RV into the small campground on a misty April morning. The park was quiet, with only a few other campers scattered around, their tents barely visible through the fog rolling off the Mississippi River. It was perfect, isolated but not desolate. After parking near a trail that led to the bluff, I stepped out to take in the view. The cliffs loomed high above the water, the kind of place that felt timeless, ancient. The fog clung to the edges, blurring the line between land and sky. It was beautiful, sure, but there was something else about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The first day was uneventful. I hiked a few trails, snapped some photos of the river, and scribbled a few half-hearted journal entries in the evening. Writing had always been my outlet, even back when I was a journalist. Now, it was more of a lifeline, something to keep me grounded when the weight of my regrets threatened to crush me. That night I cooked dinner over a camp stove and settled in to read. The fog was thicker than before, swirling outside the RV windows like smoke. The quiet was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Around midnight I heard something. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was a voice, faint and indistinct, carried on the breeze. "Jack," it whispered. I bolted upright. It was distant, almost too faint to hear, but unmistakable. My name. Jack. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the darkness. The fog swallowed the beam of light almost immediately, reducing visibility to a few feet. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Jack." I backed toward the RV, my heart pounding. The voice didn't sound threatening, but it didn't sound right either. It had a hollow, echoing quality, like it was coming from a broken radio. I shut the door and locked it, refusing to go back outside. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd been dreaming, or maybe the stress of the last few months was finally catching up with me. I forced myself to focus on the day's plans, more hiking, more writing, anything to distract me. As I walked along one of the trails near the bluff, I came across another camper. She was sitting on a fallen log, staring out at the river. "Morning," I said, giving her a nod. She turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't go near the bluff after dark," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a strange intensity in her eyes. I frowned. "Why is that?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "People say it's haunted." "Haunted?" I couldn't help but chuckle. She didn't smile. "There's something out there. Something old. It doesn't like to be disturbed." I thought about the voice I'd heard the night before, but didn't say anything. Instead, I just nodded and kept walking, brushing her off as a superstitious local. That night, the voice returned. I was sitting at the small table in the RV, writing in my journal, when I heard it again. "Jack." It was louder this time, clearer. My pen slipped from my hand, leaving a jagged line across the page. "Jack, come outside." My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't just calling my name, it was inviting me. Against my better judgment, I stepped to the window and peered out. The fog was even thicker than the night before, and I could barely make out the shapes of the trees. But then, in the distance, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the bluff. It was tall and shadowy, its outline blurry in the mist. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Come outside," the voice repeated, louder now. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, stepping onto the damp ground. My hands trembled as I pointed the beam of light toward the bluff, but the figure was gone. The whispers continued, growing fainter, as if retreating into the woods. The next morning, I found my journal pages filled with words I didn't remember writing. "This is your fault. You can't run. He's waiting." The words were scrawled in my handwriting, but I had no memory of writing them. My stomach churned as I flipped through the pages, each one more disturbing than the last. That afternoon, I ran into the camper again, the woman who had warned me about the bluff. "Something's out there," I said, my voice low. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "It always finds the broken ones," she said. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned and walked away before I could. That night, I couldn't stay in the RV. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the bluff, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing out there. The fog wrapped around me as I approached the edge, the sound of the river below muffled and distant. I stopped when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the bluff, his back to me. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "Jack," he said, his voice smooth and deep. I froze. The figure turned, and I saw his face, or rather, the lack of it. His features were indistinct, like a smear on a canvas, but his eyes glowed faintly red. "I know what you want," he said. "I can give it to you." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "All your pain, all your guilt, it can be gone. You just have to say yes." He extended a hand, long and pale, his fingers unnaturally thin. I took a step back, shaking my head. The devil smiled. "Think about it, Jack. No more regret, no more loneliness, no more failure." Images flashed through my mind. My ex-wife's angry face, the newsroom where I'd been fired, the empty apartment I'd left behind. "No," I whispered. His smile faded. "Are you sure?" I turned and ran. I don't know how I made it back to the RV. The whispers followed me the whole way, louder and more insistent, but I didn't look back. By the time I reached the RV, the fog had begun to lift and the forest was eerily quiet. I left the park at dawn, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing at the edge of the bluff, watching me go. And I swear he was smiling. I'm Daniel Sheridan, and back in 2009, I thought a trip to the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas would be my perfect getaway. I had been RV camping for years, and nothing had ever really phased me out in the woods, until this time. I was a college professor on summer break, trying to get some peace from grading papers and dealing with know-it-all students. But, like most things in my life, even this trip went sideways. It started innocently enough. I parked my RV in a remote campsite, a spot so off the beaten path it didn't even show up on the forest maps. I liked it that way. No families with kids running around, no loud tourists with their Bluetooth speakers blasting country music. Just peace, quiet, and the occasional rustle of leaves. I figured I'd spend the next few days hiking, fishing, and making fun of myself for thinking I could still pull off my old rugged camping days. But the solitude started feeling off by the second evening. I hadn't seen a single person since I arrived, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was stifling, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shrugged it off as paranoia at first. I mean, who wouldn't get a little jumpy after hours of quiet? I grabbed a beer, sat outside my RV, and tried to enjoy the sunset, even though it was a bit too quiet. I laughed at myself, a low, self-deprecating chuckle, thinking how city life had made me soft. That night, I heard something strange. It wasn't your usual forest noise, like wind through the trees or animals moving about. This was heavier, deliberate. Footsteps, maybe, but they stopped every time I tried to pinpoint where they were coming from. I figured it was just some animal checking out my camp. Nothing to worry about. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe I should have left then, packed up and driven out, but who leaves over a few unsettling sounds? The next morning I decided to hike a trail I'd seen nearby. It wasn't marked, but but I'd always been the blaze-your-own-trail type. About halfway in, I came across a clearing. Now, I've been around enough forests to know what a campfire site looks like, but this one wasn't normal. Stones had been arranged in a strange pattern, too deliberate, too precise. Like someone had spent way too much time making it perfect. The fire was still smouldering, even though no one had been around for hours. I stood there, staring at it, trying to figure out why it made me so uneasy. Then I noticed something, a shiny object half buried in the dirt next to the fire, a small, tarnished silver locket. Now, I'm not a detective, but I've watched enough crime shows to know that random jewelry in the middle of the woods is not a good sign. Still, I picked it up, thinking it was just some camper's lost trinket. When I opened it, though, my heart stopped. Inside was a picture of a woman and a little girl, their faces eerily familiar. I couldn't place them, but I knew I'd seen those faces before. It felt like I'd just found a clue in a mystery I didn't want to solve. I booked it out of there and went straight back to my RV. That's when things got worse. When I reached the campsite, I noticed right away that things weren't how I'd left them. The door to the RV was slightly ajar, and I never leave it unlocked. My gut told me to run, but my ego told me I was overreacting. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my truck, convinced myself I was being ridiculous, and stepped inside. The interior looked fine at first, but then I saw it. On the small table next to my half-finished beer from last night was the locket. I hadn't taken it out of my pocket since I found it, but there it was, sitting there as if someone had placed it in plain view just to mess with me. My stomach dropped, and suddenly the quietness of the woods outside felt like it was closing in on me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and grabbed my phone. I don't know what I thought I'd do. Call the police and tell them what? That someone moved my trinket? The rational part of me was struggling to keep up with the irrational fear building inside. Still, I dialed 911. The signal was weak, but I managed to get through, just barely. The operator's voice crackled, breaking up, but I could make out the words, "Stay put," and "Units on the way." I didn't even know if they'd find me out here in the middle of nowhere, but at least I'd done something. Then came the sound outside. Footsteps again, only this time they were closer, circling the RV, like someone or something was trying to figure out the best way in. The sound of twigs snapping underfoot, the deliberate crunch of dry leaves being stepped on. It wasn't random. Someone was out there, toying with me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I cursed myself for not bringing my gun. I'd left it at home, thinking I didn't need it for a simple camping trip. I peered out the window, but the dense trees made it hard to see anything. That's when I noticed the figure, a man standing just at the tree line, barely visible in the dim light. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the way he stood motionless was deeply unsettling. Then, slowly, he began to walk toward the RV. My brain kicked into survival mode. I grabbed the flashlight, knowing full well that it wasn't going to be much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. I turned off the lights inside and crouched behind the small counter, waiting, listening. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. He was close now, right outside the door. There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of someone trying the door handle. It rattled slightly, but I'd locked it. I thought maybe that would deter him, but then I heard it, the slow scraping sound of a blade being dragged along the side of the RV. He was taunting me, trying to scare me, and it was working. I gritted my teeth, gripping the flashlight tightly, trying to keep my breathing quiet. Then came the knock. Not a loud, forceful knock, but a slow, deliberate tapping, like he was trying to get my attention. My blood ran cold. Who knocks in the middle of the woods like that? I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there, waiting for him to find a way in. So I did what any desperate, cornered man would do. I yelled. I screamed at him to leave, that I'd called the cops, that they were on their way. My voice cracked, and I could hear the fear in my own words, but I didn't care. I just wanted him to go away. The knocking stopped. The silence returned, and for a moment I thought maybe it had worked. But then I heard it, A low, mocking laugh, barely audible through the walls of the RV. He was still there, and he wasn't going anywhere. I had no choice. I bolted for the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, and started the engine. The headlights flicked on, and I saw him, standing right in front of the RV, blocking the way out. His face was partially hidden by the hood of his jacket, but I could see enough. He was grinning, holding a large hunting knife, the blade glinting in the light. I floored it. The RV lurched forward, and he dove out of the way at the last second, rolling into the brush. I didn't stop to see if he was hurt. I just kept going, bouncing down the uneven dirt road, heart racing, until I reached the highway. Later that night, the sheriff found me still parked on the side of the road, shaking like a leaf. They searched the campsite but found nothing. No man, no footprints, no sign of anything unusual, except for the locket I had left behind in my rush. It turns out the faces in the picture, they were local. The sheriff recognized them, missing persons from a few years back. They'd never found the bodies. They never caught him. But I found out later his name was Ver Rowan, a drifter with a taste for tormenting campers. He killed a family once, years before, but somehow managed to avoid getting caught. The cops didn't say much, but I did some digging. The man's sick game was all about playing with his prey before finishing them off. I guess I just got lucky. My name is William Lopez, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2022 during what was supposed to be a peaceful getaway to reconnect with my younger brother Liam, who had just turned 27. I don't know if writing this will make it any easier to believe, but it's all I can do now. There are nights I wake up hearing that sound again, that awful hollow mimicry of my own voice calling out from the woods. It began as Liam's idea. He'd been bugging me for months to take a trip together, just the two of us, like we used to when we were kids. He had a knack for convincing me to humor his wild ideas, so I agreed to a weekend at Split Rock Lighthouse State Park in Minnesota. It was supposed to be simple, a rented RV, a few hikes, and some much-needed sibling bonding. We brought Liam's friend Eric along, though I'd only met him a couple of times. A quiet, broad-shouldered guy in his early 30s who didn't say much but seemed decent enough. Liam swore he was chill and a good buffer for when things got tense between us. The first day passed uneventfully. We parked the RV in a designated spot near the main trails. The plan was to hike, stargaze, and unwind. But, of course, Liam couldn't leave well enough alone. That night, as we sat around the fire, he brought up the legend of Raven's Cradle. It was an off-limits area near the cliffs, he explained, where people claimed to see skinwalkers, shape-shifting creatures from Navajo lore. "You're being ridiculous," I said, rolling my eyes. "Skinwalkers aren't even part of Minnesota's history. That's a Southwest thing." "Maybe," Liam shot back, grinning. "But legends spread. Who's to say there isn't something similar here?" Eric just stared into the flames, his jaw tight. I didn't think much of it at the time. "Let's hike there tomorrow," Liam pressed. "Come on, Camila, it'll be fun." I wanted to argue, but his excitement reminded me of when we were kids, sneaking into places we shouldn't. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The next morning, we set out. The trail to Raven's Cradle wasn't marked, but Liam had read about it on some amateur folklore blog. We veered off the main path, pushing through dense underbrush. I felt the tension early, a strange prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like we were being watched. "Do you hear that?" Eric asked suddenly, stopping mid-step. We all froze. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. I shrugged it off, trying to lighten the mood. "Nature's shy," I said, forcing a laugh. Liam didn't respond. He kept walking, his usual bravado muted. The farther we went, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. About an hour into the hike, Eric pointed at the ground. "What the hell is that?" The dirt path was marked with strange prints, large, clawed impressions that looked almost human, but wrong. Liam knelt to inspect them, his face lighting up with excitement. "See? I told you! Skinwalker tracks!" "Oh, give me a break," I snapped. "It's probably just a bear." Eric didn't look convinced, and truth be told, neither was I. We reached Raven's Cradle by late afternoon. It was breathtaking. A jagged cliff overlooking Lake Superior, the waves crashing far below. But the beauty couldn't shake the unease that had been building since the hike began. As we set up a small camp to rest, I thought I heard something. My own voice, faint and distorted, echoing from the woods. I turned sharply, my heart pounding. "Did you?" I started, but stopped myself. Liam was busy taking pictures, and Eric looked lost in thought. That night, the first real horror began. We were gathered around a fire outside the RV when Liam froze mid-sentence, staring into the trees. "Did you hear that?" I didn't respond. I'd heard it too, a soft, high-pitched laugh followed by a rustling sound. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, but the beam seemed swallowed by the night. "Probably a raccoon," I muttered, though my voice lacked conviction. "Yeah, a raccoon that laughs," Eric said dryly. His calm demeanor was cracking. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. Liam grabbed a branch from the fire, holding it like a weapon. The next few hours were a blur of terror. Something or someone was stalking us. We saw glimpses of it between the trees, a figure that shifted and twisted, its form flickering between animal and human. When I caught a full glimpse of it, I froze in disbelief. It had Liam's face. Not quite, though. It was an uncanny, distorted version. Its eyes too large, its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. My breath hitched as it mimicked his voice perfectly. "Camila, come here. Come closer." I screamed, backing away, and the thing disappeared into the woods, leaving only the echo of its voice. Back at the RV, we locked ourselves inside, our panic mounting. The generator sputtered out, plunging us into darkness. Scratching sounds started on the walls, followed by heavy thuds on the roof. The creature wasn't just stalking us anymore, it was playing with us. Eric tried to keep us calm, but even he was on edge. "We need to stay inside. It can't get in if we—" A loud crash cut him off. The back window shattered, and a long, clawed arm reached inside. Eric grabbed a knife from the counter and slashed at it, forcing it to retreat, but we knew we couldn't stay there much longer. At dawn, we decided to make a run for it. With the RV no longer safe, we packed what little we could carry and headed toward the main road. The hike back was a nightmare. The creature followed us, its mimicry growing more unsettling. It called out in Eric's voice now, pleading and screaming for help. We tried to ignore it, but the forest seemed to conspire against us. The trails looped back on themselves, leading us in circles. I felt despair creeping in, but Liam grabbed my arm, his face pale but determined. "We can't let it win," he whispered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the skinwalker made its move. It appeared directly in our path, its form more grotesque than ever. This time it took on Eric's appearance, but its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Eric, the real Eric, stepped forward with the knife. "Go! I'll hold it off." "No!" I screamed, but he didn't listen. He charged the creature, his bravery both foolish and heroic. The last thing I saw before Liam pulled me away was Eric's body collapsing as the creature's claws tore into him. Liam remembered something he'd read about skinwalkers, that invoking their true name could weaken them. In desperation, he recited a Navajo chant he'd memorized for his blog. Though it was incomplete, the creature faltered, its form flickering like a dying flame. We seized the moment, running until we broke free of the forest and onto the main road, where a passing car stopped to help. Eric was gone, and the guilt still eats at me. I haven't been back to Split Rock since. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it again, the voice calling my name from the woods. If you ever find yourself in those forests, don't listen, and for God's sake, don't follow the voices. My name is Patricia Mason. I'm 29 years old, a freelance travel writer, and this happened in the summer of 2022. My husband Jake and I were on a cross-country RV trip when we decided to camp at Preparation Canyon State Park in Iowa's Loess Hills. I had read about its remote trails and beautiful overlooks, but what caught my eye was a vague mention of Native American legends tied to the area. It seemed perfect for my blog, a mix of breathtaking scenery and a hint of mystery. Jake, being the practical one, wasn't as thrilled. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked as we drove into the park. The gravel road was narrow and lined with dense woods that seemed to close in around us. "It's beautiful," I said, trying to sound confident, "and remote. No noisy campers or crowded trails." Jake grunted, focusing on the road. He'd been irritable since the RV's generator started acting up the day before. "Just don't get us stuck out here," he muttered. We set up camp near the edge of the forest, a spot that felt secluded and peaceful. The air was warm, the sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the hills rolled into the distance like something out of a painting. I snapped photos while Jake tinkered with the generator. "You're wasting your time," I called over to him. "Come hike with me." He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Someone has to make sure this thing works, or we'll be eating cold beans in the dark." Typical Jake, logical, grounded, and completely unwilling to let loose. I grabbed my camera and decided to explore on my own. The trail started out easy, winding gently uphill, but the farther I went, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant chirping, seemed to fade. Soon there was only the crunch of my boots on the dirt path and my own breathing. That's when I felt it, a presence. It's hard to describe, but it was as if the forest itself was watching me. I stopped and turned, half expecting to see someone behind me, but there was no one. Just the trees, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. I shook it off and kept walking, though my pace quickened. About half an hour in, I spotted movement up ahead, a figure, tall and thin, walking away from me down the trail. "Hello?" I called out. The figure didn't respond. They didn't even look back. I jogged a little to catch up, but when I rounded the bend, they were gone. The trail was empty. Back at the RV, Jake was scowling at a bundle of wires. "This thing's toast," he said as I approached. "We're running on fumes." "Well, the forest is creepy as hell, so maybe it's a sign we should leave," I joked, but my voice lacked conviction. Jake glanced at me. "You okay?" "Yeah, just weird vibes out there." He rolled his eyes. "You and your vibes." We argued briefly about whether to stay another night, but I won out. I wasn't ready to give up on the photos and blog content I'd hoped to capture. That night I woke to the sound of Jake's voice. "Jacob," he said softly, "come here." I blinked, groggy, and realized the voice was coming from outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding. Jake was next to me, asleep. "Jacob," the voice called again, closer this time. My stomach twisted into a knot. I peered out the window and saw him, Jake, standing at the edge of the forest, his back to me. "Jake," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He stirred and opened his eyes. "What?" I pointed to the window. "You're outside." Jake frowned, sitting up. He looked out, then back at me. "Stay here," he said. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. I watched from the window as he scanned the area, the beam of light sweeping through the trees. "There's no one here," he said when he came back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I tried to laugh it off. "Maybe I dreamed it," I said over breakfast. Jake didn't respond. He was examining deep scratches on the RV's door, 3 parallel gouges that hadn't been there the day before. "Raccoons," he muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. We decided to hike together that day, sticking to the main trails. Still, the eerie silence persisted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We found tracks, large, clawed, and too deep to belong to a deer. They led into the woods but disappeared abruptly, as if whatever made them had simply vanished. Jake tried to stay logical, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Let's head back," he said finally. That night, things escalated. We were sitting by the fire trying to relax when we heard it, my voice calling Jake's name. We froze. "Jacob," it said again, but it was wrong, off somehow, like a recording played on an old, warped cassette. Jake grabbed my hand. "Get in the RV," he whispered. We locked the doors and shut the windows, but the voice continued, circling the RV. Then it changed. "Jake," it called now, mimicking me perfectly. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Jake grabbed a knife from the kitchenette and stood by the door, his knuckles white. The voice became more frantic, louder, screaming his name. It slammed against the RV, rocking it slightly. "What is it?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice shaking. The banging stopped around dawn. When we stepped outside, the campsite was empty, but the ground was littered with claw marks and tufts of fur. The RV's windows were scratched, and the fire pit had been scattered. "We're leaving," Jake said, but the RV wouldn't start. The generator was dead, and the backup batteries were drained. Jake worked frantically while I kept watch, clutching a flashlight and trying not to panic. Then I saw him, Jake, standing in the trees again. I nearly screamed. This time, the figure turned to look at me. Its face was almost Jake's, but stretched, twisted, wrong. "Jacob," it said, grinning too wide. We managed to start the RV just as the creature emerged from the woods, running toward us on all fours. Its mimicry was distorted now, guttural and alien. Jake floored the gas and we sped down the gravel road, the creature chasing us for what felt like miles. It stopped abruptly at the park's boundary, watching as we drove away. We didn't talk about it for days. Even now, I don't know what we saw, but I've read enough since to believe it was something ancient, tied to the land and its legends. I've never returned to the Loess Hills, and I never will. Some places are meant to be left alone. My name is Barbara Mason. I'm 33 years old, and this story happened last summer after a devastating accident on a school field trip where one of my students drowned. I've carried a crushing weight of guilt. The world called it an accident, but in my heart I couldn't let it go. I needed space, time to think and heal, or so I thought. That's why I took my RV to Yellow Smoke Park in Denison, Iowa. I told myself the trip was about peace and closure. I'd hike, write in my journal, and maybe find some kind of forgiveness. But Yellow Smoke had other plans for me. I arrived on a warm June morning. The lake sparkled under the sun, and the woods around the campground buzzed with life. It looked idyllic, exactly the kind of place I'd imagined. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, close enough to hear the water lapping against the shore, but far enough from the main camping area to feel the solitude I craved. The first day was uneventful. I walked the trails, snapping photos of birds and wildflowers, and returned to my RV just as the sun began to set. That's when I heard it for the first time. Faint laughter, high-pitched and joyful, coming from the direction of the lake. I smiled despite myself. It was nice to hear kids playing, a reminder of the good moments I'd had with my students before the accident. But as I peered out the window, something felt off. The campground was quiet, and I hadn't seen any families nearby. Yet near the water's edge I saw a little girl. She was playing alone, her pale dress swaying in the breeze. "Hey, sweetie," I called, stepping out of the RV. "Where are your parents?" The girl froze. Slowly, she turned to look at me. Her face was blank, expressionless. My stomach twisted. She pointed toward the lake, then turned and ran toward the water, disappearing into the mist. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe her parents were just out of sight, or maybe I was tired from the long drive. That night I wrote about her in my journal, describing her pale dress and the odd, hollow look in her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking. At first I thought it was an animal, but then I heard it again. Deliberate, rhythmic, and coming from the door of my RV. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window. The knocking stopped. But as I shone the beam of light across the foggy campground, I saw them. Small, muddy handprints streaked across the side of my RV. I slammed the curtain shut and spent the rest of the night clutching my flashlight, listening to whispers that seemed to float on the breeze. The next day, I tried to distract myself with another hike. The woods were dense and lush, the air cool beneath the canopy of leaves. I told myself that what had happened the night before was just my imagination. That's when I saw her again, the little girl. She was standing at the edge of the trail, watching me. "Hi," I said cautiously, stepping closer. She tilted her head. "Do you want to play?" The question sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced a smile. "Where are your parents?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and started walking deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed her. We emerged into a clearing where an old rusted playground stood. Swings creaked in the breeze, and a decayed slide leaned precariously to one side. Carved into the wood of a splintered seesaw were names. Dozens of them, some faded, some fresh. "What is this place?" I asked, but the girl was gone. I returned to my RV, shaken. That evening I drove into town to pick up some supplies and couldn't resist asking the cashier about the playground. "You found that old thing?" she said, her face pale. "No one's used it in years." "Why not?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "Because it's cursed. Everyone knows that. Kids drown in that lake and their spirits linger. They say they're looking for playmates." I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "Ghost stories." "You believe what you want," she said, her tone serious. I drove back to the campground with a heavy heart, the weight of the stories pressing against my chest. That night, the little girl came to my RV door. I heard her faint voice calling, "Emma, come outside, we can play now." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told her my name. I stayed frozen in my seat, clutching my flashlight as the knocking began again, this time more insistent. When I finally worked up the courage to look out the window, I saw not just her but a group of children. Their faces were pale, and their eyes dark. They surrounded the RV, their small hands leaving streaks of mud across the windows. "Come play with us!" They chanted, their voices overlapping in an eerie melody. I screamed, grabbing my journal and clutching it to my chest. The next morning, I resolved to end it. I hiked back to the playground, determined to face whatever was haunting me. The air was thick with tension, the woods unnervingly silent. When I reached the clearing, the children were waiting. Maggie, as I'd come to call the little girl, stood at the center. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were filled with sadness. "You let us down," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "It was an accident." The other children began to move closer, their pale forms flickering like static. "You let her drown," Maggie said, her tone turning accusing. "I know," I sobbed. "I know I failed. I'm sorry." The children paused, their movements stilling as my words echoed in the clearing. "I'm sorry," I said again, louder this time. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her. I'm sorry I wasn't enough." The children stared at me for a long moment, then began to fade, one by one, until only Maggie remained. "Thank you for playing with us," she said, her voice almost kind. Then she too disappeared. The park was quiet when I returned to my RV. The handprints were gone, and the air felt lighter, less oppressive. I left a bouquet of wildflowers by the lake before I drove away, a small token of my regret and hope for forgiveness. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw Maggie standing by the water, her pale dress swaying in the breeze. She raised a hand in farewell, and for the first time I felt a sliver of peace. That night, when I opened my journal, I found a new entry written in a child's handwriting. "Thank you for playing with us. We forgive you." I've always been drawn to mysteries, but I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, wendigos, those were just stories, nothing more. Grace, my best friend since college, had the opposite mindset. She lived for the thrill of the unexplained. It's how we ended up at Devil's Kettle in northern Minnesota, a waterfall that split in two. One half flowed downstream, the other disappeared into a deep, inexplicable sinkhole. No one knows where the water goes. People have tried tracking it, dropping dye and ping-pong balls into the hole, but nothing ever reappears. The mystery made it the perfect stop for our road trip. We arrived late in the afternoon, the low sun casting golden light across the dense woods of Judge C.R. Magny State Park. Grace parked our aging sedan in the small lot near the trailhead, and we loaded up with camping gear. "You sure about this?" I asked as I shouldered my pack. "The rangers said camping this close to the falls isn't recommended." "Emma," she said, flashing her usual mischievous grin, "since when have we listened to warnings?" She wasn't wrong. Grace had dragged me to abandoned hospitals, ghost towns, and more sketchy roadways than I could count. This time, though, something about the ranger's tone lingered. "Just don't get too close to the sinkhole," he'd warned, looking straight at Grace like he knew she'd ignore him. The hike was easy enough, 2 miles of well-worn trail cutting through towering pines and birches. The falls greeted us with a roar, mist rising as the water surged over the edge into the mysterious void. Grace stood on the overlooked platform, leaning precariously over the rail. "Don't fall in," I said. she smirked. What? You wouldn't jump in after me? Nope, I replied, deadpan. I'd call your parents and tell them you were stupid enough to lean too far. We laughed, but as we set up camp near the falls, the humour faded. Something about the place felt wrong. The air had a heaviness to it, like a storm was coming, but the sky remained clear. The forest, too, was eerily quiet, no birds, no rustling leaves, just the relentless roar of water. After dinner, we built a fire and sat talking about old times. Grace had her flashlight out, testing it, when the beam flickered and died. Well, that's annoying, she muttered, shaking it. Good thing you've got yours. Maybe try not breaking your gear next time, I teased, tossing her a spare headlamp from my bag. We turned in not long after, the fire burning low. The night grew colder, and I woke shivering. I reached for my jacket, but something outside stopped me. Whispers, faint and distorted, like someone murmuring underwater. I rose, straining to listen. "Grace?" I whispered. Her steady breathing answered me. She was asleep. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they formed words. "Emma, come outside." I bolted upright. That voice, it was mine. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the tent flap, heart pounding. There was nothing there. Just the dense wall of trees and the crackle of the dying fire. I lay awake the rest of the night, every shadow a threat. In the morning, Grace's hiking boot was missing. "You're joking, right?" she said, searching around the tent. "I left them right here." We eventually found it hanging from a tree branch about 30 feet away. Neither of us had put it there. Grace brushed it off as a prank. I wasn't so sure. We hiked to the falls again, planning to photograph them in the early light. Grace, ever the daredevil, insisted on getting closer to the sinkhole. "This is a terrible idea," I said as she climbed over the protective railing. "It's fine. I'll be careful." She inched toward the edge, camera in hand, the roar of the falls drowning out my protests. Just as she leaned forward, her body jerked like someone had pushed her. She screamed, scrambling back from the edge. I rushed to pull her up. "What happened?" I asked, breathless. "I don't know," she stammered, shaking. "I swear it felt like someone shoved me." The unease deepened as we hiked back to the campsite. The forest felt wrong, the air thick with decay. It was subtle at first, a faint, sour smell, but the farther we walked, the stronger it grew. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced we were being followed, though I never saw anything. That night the whispers returned. This time they were louder and unmistakable. "Emma," the voice called, dragging out my name. "Help me." It was Grace's voice. I sat up, heart hammering. "Grace?" I whispered, shaking her awake. She groaned, groggy and annoyed. "What?" she mumbled. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The voice came again, clear and insistent. "Emma, help me." It came from the direction of the falls. Grace heard it too this time. Her eyes widened. "What the hell?" We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out of the tent. The forest was still, the fire long dead. The voice called again, faint and distant. Against my better judgment, I followed it, Grace close behind. As we approached the falls, my flashlight caught something in the trees, a figure, tall and gaunt, with glowing yellow eyes. It was barely human, its limbs too long, its movements jerky. It watched us for a moment before disappearing into the shadows. "Did you see that?" Grace whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. My chest felt tight, like the air itself was pressing down on me. "We need to leave," I said finally. "Now." Grace didn't argue. We packed up in silence, every snap of a twig making me flinch. As we made our way back to the trailhead, the thing followed us. I'd catch glimpses of it in the trees, always just out of reach, its glowing eyes searing into me. Halfway back, Grace vanished. I turned around to say something, but she was gone. "Grace," I called, panic rising. No answer, just the roar of the falls and that damn smell of decay. I searched the area, yelling her name. Finally, I spotted her jacket hanging from a low branch. It was torn and bloodied. My stomach dropped. "Emma!" her voice called from deeper in the woods. It sounded wrong, too high, too distorted. I followed it, desperate, until I found her sitting by the fire back at our campsite. "Grace?" I asked cautiously. She didn't respond, just stared into the flames. Her movements were stiff, unnatural. When I circled around to face her, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Grace. Its face was skeletal, skin stretched impossibly thin. Its eyes glowed yellow, and when it smiled, its teeth were jagged and too many. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I barreled through the forest, heading for the parking lot. The thing was behind me, its footsteps crunching closer, its voice calling my name in Grace's tone. "Emma, come back," it said, laughing. "Don't leave me." I tripped, falling hard. When I looked up, the thing was standing over me, its hollow face inches from mine. I screamed, fumbling for my flashlight. Desperation took over, and I grabbed a dry branch from the ground, lighting it with a match from my pocket. The flame flared to life, and the thing hissed, recoiling. Its eyes burned brighter as it backed away, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot alone. A car drove by, and I flagged it down, sobbing as I climbed inside. "What happened?" the driver asked. I couldn't answer. My mind was stuck on the image of Grace's jacket, torn and bloodied, and the thing that had worn her face. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the forest. Grace was standing there at the edge of the trees, her eyes glowing yellow, her lips curled into a smile. Even now, days later, I can feel it watching me. In crowded streets, in my apartment at night, I hear her voice calling my name. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see glowing eyes in the darkness, waiting for me to return to Devil's Kettle. My name's Bobby Stevens, and back in 1996 I took my old RV to the fringes of the Ozark National Forest. I was tired of the desk job grind in Kansas City, so I thought a solo camping trip might clear my head. The plan was simple: drive out, park by the creek, spend a couple of days fishing, grilling, and enjoying the quiet. No neighbors, no boss breathing down my neck, just peace. Now, if you've never been to the Ozarks, picture this. Dense trees that go on forever, steep hills that make you feel tiny, and a silence so thick you start hearing things that aren't there. I parked close to the Mulberry River, deep enough into the forest that I wouldn't see another soul unless they were as lost as I felt. The first day was as peaceful as I'd hoped. I set up my fold-out chair by the water, cracked open a cheap beer, and tossed in a line. Nothing but me, the fish, and an occasional hawk gliding above. I slept like a rock that night, only to wake up to a strange sound echoing through the trees. At first, I brushed it off. It could have been a coyote, maybe a raccoon rooting around my camp. But when I got out of the RV, I saw footprints around the campsite. Not paw prints. Footprints. Human. And too close to my RV for comfort. I laughed it off, figured maybe some other camper got lost and wandered through, though I hadn't seen anyone else. The next day was fine, but around dusk, I got the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who spooks easily. I spent my teenage years in the woods, hunting deer and fishing with my dad, and I thought I knew these forests well enough. But there was something different this time. You could say the silence felt heavier, as if the trees were listening. Later that night, I heard it again, rustling near the RV. I got up, flashlight in hand, and took a quick look around. Nothing. Just shadows and my own nervous imagination, I told myself. But the next morning, the footprints were back, closer this time, with the ground scuffed up like someone had been dragging something. I didn't see anyone, but as I scanned the trees, I caught a flash of movement, a shape quickly slipping behind a tree about 50 yards out. Now I know what you're thinking. Could have been a deer or some other animal, but there was something too deliberate about it. I didn't get a clear look, but I knew I'd seen someone. By this point, I wasn't about to leave. Call it stubborn pride. I'd come here to escape the grind, not to get spooked by some weirdo lurking in the woods. I kept my pocket knife on me and decided I'd keep watch that night, just to settle my nerves. That evening, around midnight, I heard the unmistakable crunch of footsteps. Someone was walking through the underbrush, deliberately slow, like they were trying to make as little noise as possible. I turned off the RV lights and waited, crouched near the door, hoping whoever it was would just walk on by. Then I heard the sound of metal clinking. It was faint, but it had that rhythmic quality, like someone was checking their gear. I'll admit, my heart was racing at this point. I've had my fair share of bar fights and tussles over the years, but nothing prepared me for the feeling of being hunted. I spent the rest of the night on edge, gripping that pocket knife so tight my hand cramped. Around 4 a.m., I heard the footsteps fade away. Whoever it was had either lost interest or decided to let me stew in my own fear. By dawn, I was dead tired, but I wasn't about to stay in that RV another night. As I packed up, I noticed something horrifying, a small bloodied cloth hanging on the rear bumper of my RV, as if someone had left me a warning. The footprints were everywhere now, deep and deliberate, as though the person had been circling the RV, studying it. I grabbed my stuff and decided to make for the ranger station about 10 miles down the road. But as I turned onto the path, there he was, standing dead center in my way. He was tall, with wiry arms and a weathered face that looked like it hadn't seen a smile in decades. In his hands he held an old, rusty axe that looked like it had been used on more than just trees. Without a word, he started toward me, swinging that axe back and forth in a slow, almost taunting rhythm. I yelled at him to back off, trying to sound braver than I felt, but he just kept coming, his face blank, like he wasn't even seeing me. I don't know what possessed me, but I bolted back to the RV, slamming the door shut and locking it, as if that flimsy door would keep him out. He started hammering on the side of the RV, each hit sending shudders through the frame. I managed to grab a signal on my cell, just long enough to call for help, but all they could make out was the frantic tone in my voice before the line cut out. The banging stopped. I thought maybe he'd given up. But when I peered out the window, I saw him crouched by the creek, washing something in the water. The sun was coming up, casting an eerie light over the forest, and I could finally see what he'd been carrying. A blood-stained shirt. That shirt looked familiar. And my stomach dropped when I recognized it as belonging to one of the hikers I had seen posted as missing at the ranger station. He stood up, holding that shirt like a trophy, and gave me a look that told me he knew exactly what he was doing, terrorizing me, making sure I understood that he was in control. I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned on the RV, flooring it down the narrow forest road, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. I got to the ranger station, my knuckles white from gripping the wheel. I blurted out the story, barely making sense, and they called the local sheriff. I told them about the man, the axe, and the bloody shirt. They took me seriously, but there was this look in their eyes, like they'd seen this before. One of the rangers pulled me aside and said, "You're not the first to run into him. We call him Old Todd. Used to work in these parts years back. They say he snapped after losing his family, started blaming hikers for bringing bad luck." I was too shaken to ask questions. The sheriff led a search party back to my campsite, but by the time they arrived, the site was empty, just a few bloodstains by the creek and the impression of heavy boots in the mud. They found the shirt I'd seen him washing, tied to a tree, as if it were some twisted kind of offering. The sheriff shook his head, muttering something about how Old Todd was like a ghost. He'd appear just long enough to scare the life out of folks before vanishing into the trees. They said he'd lived out there so long, he knew the land better than any of them, slipping away whenever they got too close. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but what good would that do? You can't jail a man you can't catch. My name is Jeffrey Walker, and back in 2019, I took my RV up to Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I figured a solo trip into the wild would be the perfect antidote to my cubicle-induced claustrophobia. Plus, after burning yet another batch of spaghetti at home, I thought maybe the wilderness would help me find my inner Bear Grylls, or at least teach me how not to set off the smoke alarm. I arrived at the park on a crisp August morning. The air was so fresh it felt like nature's version of a deep breath. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near a glacial stream, thinking I'd found my own little slice of paradise. The only neighbors I had were towering pines and the occasional moose, who looked at me like I was the intruder, which, to be fair, I was. After setting up camp, I decided to explore the surroundings. Armed with a map, a compass I pretended to know how to use, and a trail mix that was 90% chocolate. I ventured into the forest. The serenity was overwhelming. For once, the only notifications I heard were birds chirping and leaves rustling. It was a far cry from the constant ping of emails back home. About an hour into my hike, I stumbled upon a small, weathered cabin nestled between the trees. It looked abandoned, with ivy crawling up the sides and windows clouded by dust. Curiosity got the better of me. I thought, why not take a peek? After all, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, I know. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a single-room interior cluttered with old furniture and hunting gear. Animal traps, fishing rods, and a wall adorned with antlers suggested that whoever lived here was serious about off-the-grid living, or just had a very specific decorating style. On a dusty table lay a journal. The pages were filled with scribbled notes and sketches of the surrounding area. One entry caught my eye. August 12th. Spotted another hiker today. Must be cautious. Can't let anyone find out. That was yesterday's date. A chill settled in my gut. Maybe the cabin wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. I decided it was best to head back to my RV. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, and I didn't want to navigate the forest in the dark. As I retraced my steps, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Every snapped twig and rustling leaf set my nerves on edge. I told myself I was being paranoid, perhaps a side effect of too many late-night horror movies and bad campfire stories. Back at the campsite, I cooked dinner over the fire. A culinary masterpiece of canned beans and slightly burnt sausages. Gordon Ramsay would have a field day critiquing my cooking skills. It's so raw it might just get up and walk away. I imagined him shouting. I chuckled into the night, the sound echoing among the trees. To lighten the mood further, I started telling jokes to myself. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I laughed, appreciating my own terrible sense of humor. It was just me and the wilderness, and I was determined to enjoy every minute. Just as I was considering turning in for the night, I heard a noise, a faint rustling coming from the edge of the clearing. Probably just an animal, I thought. Alaska is full of wildlife. Then I heard it again, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Human footsteps. Who's there? I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the tree line. For a moment I thought I saw a shadow dart between the trees. My heart began to race. Maybe it was another camper, or perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. Deciding that sitting outside made me feel too exposed, I retreated into the RV and locked the door. I felt a bit silly for being spooked, but better safe than sorry. I settled into bed, convincing myself that a good night's sleep would put everything into perspective. I woke abruptly to a loud thud against the side of the RV. My pulse quickened. That was no falling branch. I listened intently, straining to hear any other sounds. Then came another thud, harder this time, causing the RV to sway slightly. I quietly got out of bed and reached for the small kitchen knife I'd used earlier, not exactly a weapon of choice, but better than nothing. I crept toward the window and peeked out, but the darkness revealed nothing. Suddenly, the RV's door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. Panic surged through me. "Hey, who's out there?" I shouted, hoping to deter whoever it was. The jiggling stopped momentarily, only to resume more aggressively. I had to think fast. My phone had no signal, so calling for help was out of the question. Then I remembered the flare gun stowed away in a cabinet, a safety precaution I never thought I'd need. I grabbed it and positioned myself facing the door. "Leave now or I'll shoot," I warned. The handle stopped moving. Silence enveloped the RV. Just when I thought it might be over, a heavy object slammed against the door, cracking the frame. I fired the flare gun at the door. The bright light illuminated the interior in a flash of red. The impact startled the intruder, and I heard footsteps retreating into the woods. Breathing heavily, I waited for any sign of return. Minutes passed like hours. When everything remained quiet, I dared to hope that it was over. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat vigil until dawn, clutching the kitchen knife with a white-knuckled grip. As the first light seeped through the windows, I decided to step outside and assess the damage. The door was splintered, hanging ajar from its hinges. On the ground lay a heavy piece of timber, likely used to batter the door. But what caught my attention was a symbol carved into the wood, a crude drawing of an eye with a slash through it. I snapped a photo with my phone, thinking it might be useful evidence. Just then I heard voices in the distance, multiple people talking and laughing. Relief washed over me. Other campers, perhaps? I headed toward the sound, hoping to find help. As I approached, I realized the voices were coming from a small group gathered around a makeshift campsite. They were an odd bunch, dressed in ragged clothes, their faces smudged with dirt. They fell silent as soon as they noticed me. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Did you folks happen to see anyone around here last night?" One of them, a tall man with a tangled beard, stepped forward. "No one but us out here," he replied, his gaze steady and unblinking. I noticed something unsettling. The same eye symbol from the timber was tattooed on his forearm. A knot tightened in my stomach. "Interesting tattoo," I remarked, trying to keep my tone light. He glanced at his arm. "It's more than a tattoo," he said. "Right. Well, if you see anyone suspicious, let me know. Someone tried to break into my RV last night." He gave a faint smile. "The forest doesn't take kindly to trespassers." I decided it was time to leave. "All right, then. Have a good day." As I turned to walk away, I felt their eyes on my back like a physical weight, and that's when I knew I had stumbled into something truly dangerous. As I hurried back to my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something dangerous. I resolved to pack up and get out of there as fast as possible. When I returned, I found my RV ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, belongings scattered, and the words, "Leave now," were scrawled across the wall in what looked like charcoal. My heart pounded in my chest. This was no longer just a creepy encounter. It was a direct threat. I gathered what I could and started the engine. As I drove down the dirt road leading out of the park, I caught sight of something in the rear-view mirror. The group from earlier, standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. Just when I thought I was safe, a loud bang echoed from the side of the RV. The vehicle lurched, and I struggled to keep it on the road. I looked out the window to see one of my tires blown out. I cursed under my breath. Pulling over to assess the damage, I found the tire shredded. Upon closer inspection, I saw a makeshift spike strip embedded with nails lying nearby. This was deliberate. Out of nowhere, a figure tackled me, knocking me to the ground. It was the bearded man from the campsite. He held a knife, his eyes wild with intent. We grappled, adrenaline fueling my movements. He slashed at me, grazing my arm. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, dodging another attack. "Outsiders aren't welcome here," he snarled. I kicked at his knee, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled back toward the RV, but another member of the group appeared, blocking my path. She swung a metal pipe at me. I ducked, and it smashed into the RV's side mirror. Desperate, I remembered the flare gun still tucked into my belt. I pulled it out and aimed it at them. "Back off!" They hesitated, eyeing the weapon. The woman sneered. "That toy won't save you." She advanced. Without thinking, I fired. The flare struck her shoulder, igniting her clothes. She screamed, dropping to the ground to extinguish the flames. The bearded man charged at me in a rage. I sidestepped, causing him to crash into the side of the RV. The impact dazed him. I took the chance to climb into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. I started the engine. Despite the flat tire, the RV lurched forward, grinding against the road. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I sped down the rough path, the vehicle shook violently, the other tires threatening to give out. But I pushed on. In the distance, I saw a ranger station. Relief flooded over me. I pulled up haphazardly, honking the horn wildly. A park ranger emerged, alarmed by the sight of my battered RV and my disheveled state. "Please, I need help," I shouted. He approached cautiously. "Calm down, sir. What's going on?" "A group of people attacked me. They're back there, sabotaging the road and attacking campers." His expression grew serious. "Did you say a group?" "Yes. They tried to break into my RV last night and attacked me on the road." He radioed for backup. You're lucky you made it here. We've had reports of a cult operating in the remote areas of the park. A cult? They're hostile to outsiders. We've been trying to track them down. Another ranger arrived, and they escorted me inside, tending to my wounds. I gave a full account of what happened, showing them the photo of the symbol and describing the attackers. Over the next few hours, law enforcement combed the area. They found the spike strip and evidence of the group's campsite, but the cult members had disappeared. I was advised to stay in town until they could ensure the area was safe. They arranged for my RV to be repaired, and I checked into a local motel. At the motel, the receptionist looked up as I approached the desk. "Rough day?" she asked, eyeing my torn sleeve and bandaged arm. "You could say that," I replied. "I've had better Mondays. At least I didn't have to sit through a budget meeting," she chuckled. "Well, we've got cable and hot water. Sometimes that's all you need. Throw in a decent cup of coffee, and you might just convince me to stay forever." The following day, news came in. Authorities had discovered several shallow graves near where my RV had been parked. The bodies of missing hikers were recovered, victims of the cult's gruesome acts. I realized how close I'd come to becoming one of them. As for the cult, they remained at large. Their leader, identified as Marcus Hale, was a former survivalist with a history of violent offences. He had gathered a group of like-minded individuals, preying on unsuspecting campers and hikers. I decided it was time to head home. The allure of the wilderness had lost its charm. Before leaving, I thanked the rangers for their help and provided any additional information they needed. Then I drove out of Alaska, the road stretching ahead like a promise of safety. As I left, I couldn't help but think about Marcus Hale, a man who had turned his back on society, choosing isolation and violence over humanity. I drove on, the open road ahead, leaving the shadows of the forest and its secrets behind. The first thing you need to know about me is that I love fishing. I'm not one of those guys who just like to say they fish and then sit around drinking beer all day. No, I actually go out there on the banks of the river, rod in hand, and wait for that sweet tug on the line. It's a kind of therapy for me, a break from all the madness. My name's Brian Patel, by the way, and this story takes place back in 1987. I grew up in the Midwest, where fishing is more than just a pastime, it's practically a way of life. My old man taught me everything I know. He wasn't the nicest guy, but he knew his way around a fishing pole. I suppose that's where my love for it began. My personal life? Well, let's just say I've had my share of ups and downs. Divorced, no kids, a small circle of friends. I worked jobs here and there, nothing too stable. But fishing? That was the one constant. So there I was, in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, standing on the edge of the Red River. This spot was a gem I'd discovered a few months prior. Hardly anyone around, peaceful as hell, and the fish were plenty. I had my tackle box and my favourite rod. The sky was clear, the water calm, and everything seemed perfect. It was early morning, just after dawn. The river was shrouded in a light mist, giving it an almost mystical appearance. I cast my line and settled down in my usual spot on a large flat rock. I'd caught a couple of good-sized catfish already and was feeling pretty pleased with myself. That's when I noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a large animal moving through the trees on the opposite bank. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the damn mist made it hard to see. I brushed it off, thinking it was probably just a deer or something. Time passed, and I was lost in the rhythmic casting and reeling. It wasn't until I heard a splash that I looked up again. There it was, across the river, closer this time. It wasn't a deer, it was something much larger, and its movements were deliberate, almost calculated. My heart started to race a bit, but I tried to keep my cool. Probably just a bear, I muttered to myself. Just stay on your side, buddy. But the thing didn't stay on its side. It slipped into the water and began to swim across. Now, I've seen my fair share of wildlife, but this was something different. It moved through the water with a grace that didn't match its bulk. I could make out rough, leathery hide and what looked like scales. My stomach did a little flip. The creature emerged on my side of the river, shaking water off its massive frame. It stood on all fours, but it was as tall as a man. Its head was like that of a lizard, with a long snout and rows of sharp teeth. The eyes were the worst part, cold, dark, and calculating. This was no bear. I scrambled back, my fishing rod forgotten. The creature didn't seem to notice me at first. It sniffed the air, then began to move toward me with a predatory grace that made my blood run cold. I've never felt fear like that before. I could see the muscles rippling under its hide as it walked, the claws on its feet digging into the earth. "Holy," I whispered. "What the hell are you?" Now, you'd think a guy like me, who spent so much time in nature, would be packing some heat. But no, I'd left my shotgun at home. I always figured the worst thing I'd encounter out here was a rabid raccoon or a pissed-off beaver. This thing was way out of my league. I started backing away slowly, hoping to reach my truck. I'd parked it a little way off, thinking the walk would be good exercise. Stupid move. The creature's head snapped in my direction, and it let out a sound that was halfway between a hiss and a growl. I nearly pissed myself. All right, I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Just stay calm, Brian. It's just an animal. You've faced worse. But the truth was, I hadn't. This thing was like nothing I'd ever seen. It started moving toward me. Faster now. I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the wet grass. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush. My heart was pounding. My lungs felt like they were going to burst. I reached the tree line and kept running, branches whipping at my face. I could hear the creature getting closer, its breath hot on my heels. Then I spotted an old dilapidated cabin up ahead, probably abandoned. Without thinking, I bolted for it. I slammed into the door with my shoulder and it gave way with a creak. I stumbled inside and kicked the door shut, fumbling for something to barricade it with. There wasn't much, a broken chair, some old crates. I shoved everything I could find against the door, then backed away, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. The cabin was dark, the air thick with dust, and the smell of rot. I found a rusty hatchet hanging on the wall and grabbed it, my hands shaking. The creature was outside now, circling the cabin. I could hear its claws scratching at the wood, testing for a weak spot. My mind raced. How the hell was I going to get out of this? There was a small window on the far side of the cabin. Maybe, just maybe, I could slip out and make a run for it. I crept over, trying to stay quiet. The window was grimy, but I could see the outline of the trees outside. I started to pry it open, wincing as it squealed in protest. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The creature had thrown its weight against the door. The barricade was starting to give. I doubled my efforts, wrenching the window open just enough to squeeze through. I was halfway out when the door gave way with a splintering crack. I looked back and saw it. The creature's head pushed through the gap, its eyes locking onto mine. There was no mistaking the hunger in those eyes. It wanted me, and it was going to get me. I twisted and kicked, pushing myself through the window and falling to the ground outside. I hit the dirt hard. The wind knocked out of me. I struggled to my feet, gasping for air. The creature was right behind me, clawing its way through the window. I didn't wait to see if it would fit. I took off running again, my legs burning with the effort. I could see the river up ahead. Maybe, if I could make it to the water, I could lose the creature. I crashed through the underbrush, lungs on fire. I could hear it behind me. Closer now. The river was just ahead. I could see the glint of the water through the trees. I burst out of the trees and onto the riverbank. Without thinking, I dove into the water. The cold hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I swam with everything I had. I glanced back and saw the creature on the bank, pacing back and forth. It let out a roar of frustration, and I knew I'd made the right call. I kept swimming until I reached the other side. I dragged myself onto the shore, collapsing in a heap. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What the hell was that thing? And why was it after me? I forced myself to get up. I couldn't stay here. I needed to get to my truck and get the hell out of here. I stumbled through the trees, my body aching. It felt like hours before I finally saw the glint of my truck in the distance. I reached the truck and yanked the door open, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I floored it, tearing down the dirt road as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My mind was a mess, replaying the events of the day over and over. I needed to tell someone, but who would believe me? I decided to go to the police. Maybe they could make sense of it. I drove to the station and stumbled inside, looking like I'd been through hell. The officer at the desk looked up, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. "Jesus, what happened to you?" he asked. I don't even know where to start," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something out there in the woods. It's not an animal. It's something else. It tried to kill me." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "All right, take a seat. Let's hear your story." I told him everything, from the moment I saw the creature to my escape across the river. He listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "That's quite a tale," he said. "But you're not the first one to report something strange out there. We've had a few missing persons cases in that area. Folks who went out into the woods and never came back." My blood ran cold. "So you believe me?" He nodded. "I believe you saw something. What it is I don't know, but we'll send a team out there to investigate." I spent the night in a motel, too shaken to drive home. The next morning I went back to the police station to see if they'd found anything. The officer I had spoken to was waiting for me. "We sent a team out to the area you described," he said. "They found the cabin, and they found tracks. But whatever it was, it's gone now." "Gone?" I asked, my stomach sinking. He nodded. "We're keeping an eye on the area, but for now, it looks like you're safe." Safe. The word felt hollow. I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I left the station and headed home, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What was that creature? Where had it come from? And why had it targeted me? I never found the answers to those questions. But I stopped fishing at the Red River. Some things are better left alone. In the weeks that followed, I tried to get back to my normal routine, but the memory of that day haunted me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I could hear the creature's claws scratching at my door. I eventually moved away from North Dakota, hoping to put some distance between myself and that nightmare. I settled in a small town in Colorado, far from any rivers or dense forests. I made new friends, got a steady job, and tried to rebuild my life. But I never forgot. Sometimes late at night, I'd find myself staring out the window, half expecting to see those cold, dark eyes staring back at me. I told myself it was all in my head, just a bad dream. But deep down, I knew better. The world is full of mysteries, and not all of them are meant to be understood. Some things are better left unexplored, left to the shadows where they belong. And as for me, I'll stick to fishing in well-populated areas from now on. Some lines are better left uncrossed. Years later, I heard rumors of strange sightings in other parts of the country, people disappearing, strange creatures spotted in the woods. Each story sent a chill down my spine, a reminder of that day by the Red River. I'd listen to the reports, shaking my head, feeling a strange sense of kinship with those who had encountered the unknown. I never went back to North Dakota, never returned to the Red River. But sometimes in the quiet moments, I'd think about that creature and wonder, was it still out there, lurking in the shadows? Or had it moved on, searching for its next victim? I'd never know for sure. One thing was certain, though. That day had changed me. I'd seen the darker side of nature, the hidden corners of the world where the unknown lurked, and I'd learned to respect it, to keep my distance, and to remember that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we can't explain. Life went on, and I found peace in the simple things. I made new memories, found new joys, and left the past behind. But I never forgot the lesson I'd learned by the Red River. Some stories don't have neat, tidy endings. Some nightmares don't end when you wake up. And sometimes the only thing you can do is move forward, one step at a time, and hope that the darkness doesn't follow. My name is Zachary Coleman, and this happened to me on June 16th, 1999. I worked as a search and rescue officer in the dense forests of northern Idaho. My team and I were called out to find a missing hiker, Dave Mattingly, who had been out for 2 days with no sign of returning. We got the call around 7 a.m., and by 8:30 we were deep into the woods. The area was rugged, with thick underbrush and towering pines. It wasn't a popular spot, mainly frequented by locals who knew how to navigate its labyrinthine paths. Dave had set out on his hike alone. According to his wife, he was experienced but had a habit of wandering off the main trails. His wife, Marcy, mentioned that he always carried a pocket knife and a small first aid kit, but nothing more, no gun, no radio. We geared up with the usual radios, first aid kits, maps, and my trusty Bowie knife. I didn't carry a gun. Never really felt the need for one in these parts. Bears and cougars were rare, and a knife usually sufficed for protection. My team consisted of 3 other guys: Bob Murdoch, a burly ex-Marine with a knack for finding trails; Charlie Benson, a lean guy with the stamina of a marathon runner; and Eric Turner, the rookie, eager but green. We split into 2 groups. Bob and I took the northern route, while Charlie and Eric headed south. We agreed to rendezvous at a clearing known as Pine Ridge by noon. It was a steep climb, and Bob and I pushed through, occasionally calling out Dave's name. By 10 a.m. we found our first clue, a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch. It matched the description of the shirt Dave was wearing. We radioed Charlie and Eric, letting them know we might be onto something. As we moved deeper, the forest grew eerily quiet. Bob joked about how it felt like we were being watched. I laughed it off, but something about the silence didn't sit right with me. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a small campsite. There were signs of a struggle: scattered gear, an overturned pot, and a bloodstain on the ground. It wasn't a lot, but enough to make my stomach churn. We called it in and started searching the area more thoroughly. Bob found a trail of blood drops leading away from the campsite. We followed it for about half a mile before the drops became smears and then disappeared altogether. It was close to noon, so we headed to Pine Ridge to meet up with Charlie and Eric. When we got there, Charlie was pacing, looking worried. Eric was missing. Charlie said they had found another clue, an abandoned backpack, but Eric had insisted on checking a nearby cave by himself and hadn't come back. We decided to check out the cave together. It wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute hike. The entrance was narrow, but we squeezed through, calling out for Eric. Inside, the cave was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. About 30 feet in, we found Eric. He was on the ground, unconscious but breathing. He had a nasty gash on his head, and his radio was smashed. Bob and I lifted him while Charlie kept an eye out for any signs of what had attacked him. We couldn't be sure if he had fallen or if something else had happened. We made a makeshift stretcher and began the slow trek back to the nearest ranger station. It was a grueling hike, especially with Eric's added weight. We had to move carefully, but we made decent time, arriving just before dark. Eric was rushed to the hospital. The rest of us regrouped to plan our next move. With one man down, the search for Dave took on a new sense of urgency. The blood and the struggle at the campsite indicated he was in serious trouble. The next day, we brought in reinforcements, a few more guys from the county and a couple of volunteers who knew the area well. We divided into 3 groups and spread out. My group focused on the area around the cave, combing through every inch. Around mid-morning, we found another clue: Dave's pocket knife, half buried in the dirt. The blade was bent, and the handle was sticky with what looked like blood. It was a bad sign, but it also meant we were close. We pushed forward, following a faint trail through the underbrush. The forest was thick, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural noise that sent shivers down my spine. Bob, who was leading, froze and motioned for us to stop. The noise came again, closer this time. We crouched, peering through the foliage. In the dim light, we could make out a shape moving among the trees. It was large, hulking, and definitely not human. Bob whispered for us to back away slowly, but just as we started to retreat, the thing charged. It barreled through the underbrush with terrifying speed. Bob managed to get off a shot with his flare gun, the bright light momentarily blinding it. We ran. The thing roared, an awful, bone-chilling sound, and gave chase. We scattered, each of us sprinting in different directions. I didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could, branches whipping at my face. I stumbled into a clearing, panting and trying to catch my breath. The forest was silent again, except for my own ragged breathing. I had no idea where the others were or if they had made it out. My radio was still working, so I called for backup, giving them my coordinates. I heard rustling behind me and spun around, my knife at the ready. It was Bob, limping but alive. He had a deep gash on his leg, but he was grinning, relieved to see me. We didn't have time to chat. We needed to get back to the ranger station. The trek back was agonizingly slow, with Bob barely able to walk. I had to support most of his weight, but we made it. The others were already there, battered but alive. Charlie had a broken arm, and one of the volunteers was missing, presumably taken by the creature. We radioed for more help and set up a perimeter around the station. It was going to be a long night. We took turns keeping watch, guns and flares at the ready. The creature didn't come that night, but we could hear it in the distance, its haunting cries echoing through the forest. By morning, reinforcements arrived. They brought heavier firepower and more men. We went back into the forest, determined to find Dave and put an end to whatever was out there. It took 2 more days of relentless searching before we found him. Dave's body was in a small ravine, covered in scratches and bite marks. He had put up a fight, but he didn't stand a chance against the creature. We radioed it in and carefully carried his body back to the station. The authorities were called, and the area was closed off. They conducted an investigation, but officially they never found the creature. Unofficially, they told us it was likely a bear, though none of us believed it. Bears didn't move like that, didn't hunt like that. Eric recovered from his injuries, but never came back to search and rescue. Charlie took a desk job, and Bob retired early. As for me, I stayed on, but I never went back to that part of the forest. There are places in this world that are best left alone, and that was one of them. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear its cries in my dreams, and I know that out there in those dark woods, something waits. I remember it like it happened yesterday, even though it was a couple of years ago now. I had decided to take a break from the city and go camping in my RV. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, but I had everything I needed. My name's Robert David, and at that time I was working a desk job that drained my soul bit by bit. The idea of spending a weekend in nature, away from emails and endless meetings, sounded like heaven. I chose a spot in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, not too far from the town of Hamilton. It wasn't a popular camping spot, which suited me just fine. Less noise, fewer people. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp, cooked some burgers on the portable grill, and sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet. As the sun set, the sounds of the forest took over. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. The next day I decided to explore the woods a bit. There was a small trail that led deeper into the forest, so I grabbed my backpack, a bottle of water, and set off. It was late afternoon by the time I realized I had wandered farther than I intended. The forest was dense, and the trail had become less clear. I turned around, hoping to retrace my steps, but everything looked different. It was as if the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking. I wasn't panicking yet. I had my phone with GPS, but as luck would have it, there was no signal. I walked for another hour, maybe 2, until the light began to fade. Then I heard it, a scream, distant but unmistakable. It was a man's scream, full of terror. I froze, listening. The forest was silent again, but that scream had set my nerves on edge. I decided to head in the direction I thought the scream had come from, thinking someone might need help. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in around me. The forest felt oppressive, the air heavy. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe someone had an accident, or maybe it was just my imagination. Then I found it. A campsite, but it was a mess. The tent was torn, supplies scattered everywhere. It looked like a struggle had taken place. Blood spattered on the ground confirmed my worst fears. I called out, but there was no answer. There was no sign of whoever had been camping there. I found a wallet among the debris. The driver's license said Benny Caldwell. I didn't know what to do. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to be caught out in the open. I decided to head back to my RV and report this to the authorities, but finding my way back was another challenge. The forest seemed even more labyrinthine in the dark. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the woods, I saw a light in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized it was my campfire. I practically ran the last stretch, feeling an irrational sense of safety once I was back in my RV. I locked the doors and tried to calm down. I thought about driving out of there immediately, but fatigue hit me like a truck. I decided to wait until morning. Sleep was elusive that night. Every rustle outside, every creak of the RV set my nerves on edge. At some point I must have drifted off because I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was subtle at first, then more insistent. It was coming from the door. I grabbed a flashlight and my camping knife. Not much, but it made me feel a bit safer. I crept to the door and listened. The scratching stopped. Then there was a bang and the whole RV shook. I fell back, dropping the flashlight. In the darkness I could hear heavy breathing, something scraping against the metal of the RV. I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the flashlight, shining it toward the door. For a moment everything was still. Then something hit the window, a face, pale and twisted, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. I shouted, stumbling back, and the face disappeared. The next few hours were a blur of fear and adrenaline. The scratching and banging continued intermittently. I thought about calling for help, but my phone still had no signal. I was trapped. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the noises stopped. I waited a while longer before cautiously opening the door and stepping outside. The campsite was eerily quiet. There were scratch marks on the RV, deep grooves in the metal. I decided enough was enough. I packed up as quickly as I could and got ready to leave. As I was about to get in the driver's seat, I noticed something on the ground, a torn piece of cloth stained with blood. It wasn't there the night before. I drove straight to the nearest town and found the police station. I reported everything, Benny Caldwell, the screams, the attack on my RV. The officer took my statement but seemed skeptical. He said they'd look into it, but mentioned that the Pine Barrens were full of wildlife, and sometimes people imagined things in the dark. I left feeling frustrated and scared. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. Every noise at night made me jump. I kept thinking about that face in the window, those eyes. I tried to move on, to forget about it, but it stayed with me. A few months later, I saw a news report about a missing person in the Pine Barrens. The name caught my eye. Benny Caldwell. They had found his body, or what was left of it, deep in the woods. The police called it a bear attack, but I knew it was something else. The report mentioned other disappearances over the years, hikers and campers who went into the Pine Barrens and never came out. I started researching, trying to find out more about what might be out there. There were stories, old legends about the Jersey Devil and other creatures, but nothing concrete. Just a lot of speculation and fear. One night, I was at a bar talking to a local who had lived near the Pine Barrens his whole life. He told me a story about a creature, something the locals called the Creeper. He said it was an old legend, something parents used to scare their kids, but he looked serious when he told me that people had been disappearing in those woods for decades. The police never found anything, but the locals knew better. They stayed away from the deep woods, especially at night. I don't know if the Creeper is real or just a story, but I know what I saw, what I experienced. I haven't been back to the Pine Barrens since, and I don't plan to. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear that scratching sound, and I wonder if it's out there, looking for me. Life went on, and I tried to put the experience behind me. I moved to a different city, started a new job, and made new friends. But the fear never entirely left. I became more cautious, always looking over my shoulder, especially in unfamiliar places. Years later, I got a call from an old friend, Matt, who wanted to go camping. We chose a different location, far from the Pine Barrens in the Adirondacks. The first night was fine, just like old times, sitting by the fire, sharing stories. But on the second night, I woke up to a familiar sound, scratching. My heart raced as memories of the Pine Barrens flooded back. Some experiences leave a mark that never fully heals. The creeper, or whatever it is, remains a mystery, a dark shadow in my past that I can't escape. So if you ever find yourself in the Pine Barrens or any deep, dark forest, be careful. Listen to the locals, heed their warnings, and if you hear scratching at your door in the middle of the night, don't open it. Some things are better left unseen. Most people assume a job with the government is a safe gig, pension, health insurance, a sense of security. I thought the same until I got transferred to the Special Research and Containment Unit, SRCU. It's one of those divisions that doesn't officially exist. You know the type, where there's no nameplate on the door and your paycheck just says federal compensation. They brought me on because I was a damn good tracker. Years spent in the army hunting down insurgents in the middle of nowhere, then a stint with Homeland Security tracking down unusual threats, the kind that most people don't even know are real. The SRCU was different from anything I'd ever been a part of. They called us hunters, but we weren't chasing anything normal. Cryptids, creatures, monsters, whatever you want to call them. The brass handed us dossiers with little more than grainy photos and second-hand accounts from the survivors, most of whom were half mad by the time we got to them. It's the kind of work that keeps you up at night, and it sure as hell isn't something you can talk about at a bar. I've always been a straightforward guy. Follow orders, get the job done, and move on. But this job, it's the kind that sticks with you, no matter how many showers you take afterward. The last mission I went on was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. We were deployed to the forests of West Virginia, near a small unmarked town named Hollow Creek. The locals had been reporting strange disappearances, mostly drifters, people who wouldn't be missed. But then a couple of kids went missing, and that's when the feds got involved. By the time we were called in, the local police had already thrown in the towel. They chalked it up to wild animals, maybe a rogue bear. But our briefing made it clear this wasn't any bear. We were a team of 4. Me, 2 other agents from the SRCU, and a local guide named Roy Caldwell. Roy was an older guy, leathery from years spent hunting in those woods. He wasn't one to scare easily, but even he seemed spooked by the reports. He didn't say much on the chopper ride out, just kept his eyes on the trees as we flew over the thick canopy. "They call it the Hollow Man," Roy finally muttered as we landed, his voice barely audible over the rotor blades. "They say it looks like a man, but it ain't. It's something else." The mission was simple. Locate the creature, eliminate the threat, and bring back any evidence. We were armed to the teeth. Shotguns loaded with incendiary rounds, silver-tipped bullets, and a few experimental weapons the eggheads in the lab cooked up. But as we hiked deeper into the woods, I had the distinct feeling that none of it would matter. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, makes your ears strain for any sound. The ground was soft underfoot, carpeted with fallen leaves that had gone uncrushed for what seemed like centuries. Every so often, we'd come across a patch of earth that had been torn up, as if something massive had passed through. Roy would crouch down, examine the disturbed soil, and shake his head. "No tracks," he said each time. No sign of what did this. Hours passed and the tension grew thicker. With each step, we found the first body, just after sunset. It was one of the missing kids, a teenager no more than 16. His body was draped over a low branch as if he'd been dropped from above. His limbs were twisted at odd angles and his face was frozen in a look of pure terror. But what struck me most was the precision. There were no claw marks, no bites, just a single clean wound right at the base of his skull. "This isn't right," one of the agents muttered. "No animal does this." We pressed on, the darkness closing in around us. Our flashlights barely pierced the thick gloom, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance just out of reach. Then we found the second body. This time it was one of the drifters, a man in his 50s. He was sprawled out on the forest floor, his torso split open like a book. His organs were missing, completely gone, as if they'd been carefully removed. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air, metallic and nauseating. Roy crossed himself, muttering something under his breath. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "We ain't prepared for this." But it was too late. We were already being hunted. The first sign of it came as a low rustling in the trees. We all spun around, weapons raised, but there was nothing there, just the dark pressing in on us. Then came the sound, a wet, tearing noise, like flesh being ripped apart. It was close, too close. I barely had time to react before something huge barreled into us, knocking 2 of the agents to the ground. It moved so fast that I only caught glimpses. A flash of pale skin, too pale to be human, and limbs that were long, too long, bending at unnatural angles. It was hunched over, its back arched, and as it slashed at the agent nearest to it, I saw its hands, long fingers tipped with something sharp, not quite claws, but close enough. I fired off a round, the shot echoing through the trees. The creature recoiled, its body twisting away from the impact, but it didn't drop. Instead, it turned those impossible limbs toward me, its head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible. There was a face, or something resembling a face, but it was distorted, like someone had tried to stretch features over something that wasn't meant to wear them. It lunged again, moving faster than anything that size should. I managed to fire again, this time hitting it square in the chest. It stumbled, giving me just enough time to grab one of the experimental weapons, a sort of compact flamethrower we'd been issued for situations just like this. I didn't hesitate. I unleashed a torrent of fire at the creature. The flames licked across its skin, and for a moment I thought it might work. But then it screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that sent us all to our knees. The creature flailed wildly, the fire catching on the nearby trees, turning the whole area into an inferno. But it didn't fall. It just kept moving, its body a blazing silhouette against the roaring flames. Roy was the first to break. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. I don't blame him. Any sane man would have done the same. But there was no escaping that thing. It was faster than any of us, and within seconds I heard Roy's screams cut off abruptly. The creature rounded on me, its flesh still burning but seemingly unaffected by the flames. I could see the raw, charred muscle beneath its skin, could smell the sickening scent of burning meat. It was almost on me when the second agent fired a shot, this one with a silver-tipped bullet. The creature paused, just for a split second, and that was all I needed. I pulled the trigger on the flamethrower again, this time aiming directly at its head. The flames engulfed it, and it staggered, emitting another ear-piercing shriek. But this time it fell to the ground, writhing and convulsing. I didn't let up, not until it stopped moving altogether. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the forest around us. I grabbed the last remaining agent, and we hauled ass out of there, not stopping until we were clear of the blaze. When we finally reached the chopper, we were both covered in soot, our skins singed and blistered. The report was simple. Mission accomplished, threat neutralized. The creature's charred remains were recovered, just enough to confirm its existence. No one questioned our account. There were too many bodies, too much blood. The proof was undeniable. As the chopper lifted off, I looked back at the forest, now a smouldering ruin. Whatever that thing was, it was dead, and that was all that mattered. I remember that night like it was yesterday. There were 4 of us, all packed into my old RV, heading out to the mountains for a much-needed break from our lives in the city. It was me, Doug Mercer, and my friends Bryce Hendrickson, Phil Hayes, and Joey Larson. We had planned this trip for months, and the idea was to spend a week camping, hiking, and fishing without a care in the world. We parked the RV near a secluded spot by the river. It was a beautiful area, surrounded by thick forest and far enough from civilization that our phones barely had signal. Perfect, we thought. That night, after setting up camp and having a few beers, we all crashed inside the RV. I took the driver's seat, which reclined far enough back to sleep in, while the others spread out on the makeshift beds and the small couch. The next day, we decided to go on a hike up one of the nearby trails. It was an overcast day, with clouds hanging low and heavy in the sky, but that didn't deter us. We were here to disconnect and relax. Bryce led the way with his usual enthusiasm, a large backpack slung over his shoulder with all our hiking gear. Phil and Joey followed, with me bringing up the rear. It felt good to be out in nature, away from the hum of daily life. As we trekked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead. It grew darker and the air cooler. Bryce, ever the adventurer, suggested we go off the main trail and explore a smaller, less beaten path. Phil and Joey agreed without hesitation, and I, not wanting to be the killjoy, followed suit. We hiked for a good hour or so before we decided to take a break. Joey pulled out a map and tried to figure out where we were, but it was clear we'd strayed far from the marked paths. "We should probably head back," I said, feeling a bit uneasy. The forest was beautiful, but there was something off about it. The silence was too heavy, too absolute. "No, let's keep going for a bit," Bryce said. "We might find something cool." We walked for another half hour before stumbling upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with moss covering the wooden walls and the windows broken. Bryce, always the curious one, wanted to check it out. Phil and Joey followed him inside, while I stayed outside, keeping an eye on the forest. They were inside for maybe 10 minutes when I heard a loud crash, followed by a scream. I rushed in to find Phil and Joey standing over Bryce, who was lying on the floor, clutching his leg. "He fell through the floorboards," Joey explained, panic in his voice. Bryce's leg was at a weird angle, clearly broken. We had to get him back to the RV and then to the nearest hospital. The journey back was slow and painful. We fashioned a makeshift stretcher out of some branches and our jackets to carry Bryce. By the time we got back to the RV, it was already late afternoon and the sky was starting to darken. We laid Bryce on the couch and debated our next move. "There's no way we can drive out of here in the dark," I said. "We'll have to wait until morning." We tried to make Bryce as comfortable as possible, giving him some painkillers from the first aid kit and wrapping his leg with whatever we had. The mood was tense, and none of us felt like talking much. We decided to sleep early, hoping to get an early start the next day. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a low, rhythmic thumping coming from outside the RV. I figured it was some animal and tried to ignore it, but it persisted. I got up, careful not to wake the others, and peeked out the window. I couldn't see anything, but the sound was getting louder. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and swept the area. Nothing. As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. There, at the edge of the forest, I saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. It was tall and unmoving, and I couldn't make out any details. I called out, but there was no response. The figure just stood there, watching. I backed up into the RV, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing, and I tried to calm myself. It was probably just a trick of the light, I told myself, or maybe a deer, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning we packed up and left as soon as there was enough light to see. Bryce was in a lot of pain, but he managed to hold on. We drove to the nearest town and took him to the hospital. The doctor said his leg was broken in 2 places, but he would be fine. We were all pretty shaken up by the trip, and we didn't talk about it much after that. But there was one thing that kept nagging at me. When I looked back at that forest, at the place where I saw the figure, I couldn't help but feel like it was something more than just an animal or a trick of the light. A few weeks later, I was doing some research online, trying to find any information about the area where we had camped. I came across a local legend about a creature that was said to inhabit those woods. They called it Kak. According to the stories, it was a guardian of the forest, a spirit that protected the land from intruders. People who saw it were said to disappear, never to be found again. I don't know if what I saw that night was Kak, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I do know one thing. I won't be going back to those woods anytime soon. My name is Richard Thomas, and this happened to me on October 13th, 1999. I was out in the middle of nowhere in a place called Cattle Lake, Texas. You've probably never heard of it. It's the kind of place you go when you need a break from everything, when you want to get lost on purpose. I took my RV out there for a long weekend of fishing and solitude. I needed the quiet, the peace, the escape from my day-to-day grind. Life back home was like a pressure cooker, and I was looking forward to some time alone to clear my head. I had my fishing gear, a few good books, and enough beer to last me a week. The first couple of days were perfect. I caught some decent-sized bass, read a couple of chapters from a dog-eared novel, and watched the sun dip below the tree line every evening. There wasn't a soul around, and that's just how I liked it. On the third night, though, things took a turn. I was sitting by the fire grilling a couple of catfish I'd caught earlier that day. The sky was clear, stars bright and close enough to touch. I heard a rustling in the woods behind me, but figured it was just a raccoon or maybe a deer. Animals were common around these parts, and they didn't bother me. I was more concerned with keeping them away from my food. But the rustling got louder, closer. It didn't sound like a deer or a raccoon. It was heavier, deliberate. I called out, "Who's there?" expecting no answer, and I got none. Still, the noise stopped. I shook it off, thinking maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint noises like footsteps just outside the RV. I sat up in bed, listening, straining my ears. Nothing. Finally, around 3 a.m., I managed to doze off. The next morning, I found the cooler I had left outside overturned, its contents scattered. My first thought was a bear, but there aren't any bears around Cattle Lake. Coyotes, maybe, but they usually stick to smaller game. I shrugged it off, cleaned up the mess, and went about my day. I decided to take the canoe out, paddle around the lake, and see if I could find a new fishing spot. The water was calm, and the weather was perfect. I lost track of time, and before I knew it, the sun was starting to set. I headed back to the campsite, tired but content. When I got back, something fell off. The fire pit had been disturbed, and the wood I'd gathered was scattered. My fishing gear, which I'd left neatly organized, was in disarray. I felt that chill run down my spine. Someone had been here. I looked around, but saw no one. I called out again, "Hello? Anyone there?" Nothing. I decided to lock myself in the RV that night. As darkness fell, the sense of unease grew. I kept a flashlight and a hunting knife close by. The noises started again, faint but persistent. Footsteps, whispers. It felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was just the wind, the trees, my imagination. But then something heavy hit the side of the RV with a thud. I jumped, heart pounding, and grabbed the flashlight. I shone it out the window, but saw nothing. I waited, listening, but all was quiet. Eventually, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I found scratches on the side of the RV, deep, jagged marks that no animal could have made. It looked like someone had taken a knife to it, but I couldn't figure out why. I was alone out here, miles from the nearest town. Who would be out here messing with me? I decided to pack up and leave. I'd had enough of the strange noises and the feeling of being watched. As I was loading up the RV, I heard it again. The rustling, the footsteps. This time I saw something move between the trees. It was too quick to make out, but it was big, bigger than any animal I'd seen around here. I grabbed my hunting knife, the only weapon I had, and moved toward the trees. "Hey!" I shouted. "Show yourself!" No answer, just silence. I felt a knot in my stomach, a primal fear I couldn't shake. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the tree line. Suddenly there was a scream, high-pitched, human. I froze. It came from deeper in the woods. Against my better judgment, I ran toward the sound. My mind raced with thoughts of someone hurt, needing help. I crashed through the underbrush, calling out, "Where are you? Are you okay?" I reached a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. There, on the ground, was a man. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes, and his face was contorted in pain. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the ground. He looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. "Help me," he gasped. I knelt beside him, trying to assess the damage. He had deep gashes all over his body, like he'd been mauled by something. I pressed my hands to the wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. "Who did this to you?" I asked. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. It's out there," he whispered, eyes darting around wildly. "Run." Before I could ask anything more, his body went limp. He was dead. I stood up, hands shaking, and backed away. I had to get out of here. I turned and ran back to the RV, heart pounding in my chest. I started the engine and tore out of there, not looking back. As I drove, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see something chasing me, but there was nothing, just the empty road and the darkening sky. I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station on the outskirts of town. I stumbled inside, looking like a madman. The clerk stared at me as I tried to explain what had happened. He called the sheriff, and soon enough I was sitting in a small office, recounting my story to a couple of skeptical deputies. They went out to the campsite but found nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle, nothing. It was like the man I'd seen had vanished into thin air. They chalked it up to stress and too much time alone in the woods, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. There's something out there, something that hunts, something that doesn't leave tracks. I never went back to Cattle Lake. Sold the RV, moved to the city. Sometimes I still hear those footsteps in my dreams, still see those eyes watching me from the darkness. The locals have a name for it, a word passed down through generations. They call it NX, a creature of the night, a hunter that leaves no trace. I don't know if that's what it was, but I do know one thing. Whatever it was, it's still out there, and it's watching. I've always loved camping. There's something about the simplicity of being out in nature, away from the noise and clutter of the city. This story, though, isn't about the peace I found in the woods. It's about the time I went camping with my buddy Kenton and stumbled onto something that changed everything. We set off one Friday, our RV packed with supplies and our spirits high. Our destination was a secluded spot in the Appalachian, a place Kenton swore by. He said he found it a few years back and hadn't seen a soul there since. It sounded perfect to me. The drive was long but uneventful. We talked about the usual stuff, work, relationships, the latest movies. Kenton was in finance, he always had a knack for numbers. Me, I was more of a hands-on guy, working construction. It paid well and kept me fit, but it was the kind of job you didn't take home with you, which suited me just fine. We arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The campsite was perfect, just like Kenton had promised, a small clearing surrounded by trees with a stream running nearby. We set up camp quickly, eager to relax after the drive. The first night was great. We cooked steaks over the fire, shared a few beers, and laughed about old times. It was like we were kids again, carefree and invincible. We turned in early, tired from the journey and lulled to sleep by the sounds of the forest. The next morning, we woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. Kenton was an early riser and had breakfast ready by the time I rolled out of bed. We planned to do some hiking, explore the area a bit. The air was crisp and fresh, the kind that clears your mind and makes you feel alive. We hiked for hours, following the stream deeper into the woods. The trail was overgrown, clearly not well traveled, which added to the sense of adventure. We didn't see any wildlife, just the usual birds and squirrels. It was peaceful. By the time we got back to camp, the sun was starting to set again. We were exhausted but happy. We made dinner and settled in for another night by the fire. That's when things started to get strange. It began with the noises. At first, it was just a rustling in the bushes. We brushed it off as a deer or some other animal. But then the noises got closer and more distinct. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our camp. Kenton was the first to speak up. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound calm. "Probably just an animal." "Doesn't sound like any animal I know," he said, frowning. We both listened, the fire crackling, the only other sound the footsteps continuing, now moving around the perimeter of our camp. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the trees but saw nothing. Kenton did the same on his side. Still nothing. We decided to turn in, though neither of us was really convinced it was just an animal. We locked the RV, something we hadn't bothered with the night before. It was a restless night. Every little noise made me jump. The next morning, we found something that made my blood run cold. Around our camp in the dirt were footprints, not animal tracks, but human foot, large and spaced in a way that suggested whoever made them was tall. They circled our camp just like we had heard. "What the hell?" Kenton muttered, staring at the prints. "You think someone's messing with us?" I asked. "Maybe," he said, though I didn't believe it. We were miles from the nearest town, and the only road in was the one we came on. It didn't make sense. We spent the day close to camp, on edge and watchful. Nothing else happened, though, and by evening we were starting to relax again. Maybe it was a prank, some local kids messing with us. That night we decided to keep watch in shifts. I took the first shift, sitting by the fire with a flashlight and a mug of coffee. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. I watched the shadows, every rustle of leaves putting me on high alert. My shift passed without incident, and I woke Kenton for his turn. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the tension. It felt like only minutes had passed when I was jolted awake by a scream. I jumped up, disoriented, and saw Kenton standing by the fire, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Kenton, what is it?" I shouted, grabbing the flashlight. "Over there," he whispered, pointing into the darkness. I followed his gaze and saw it, a figure, just at the edge of the light, tall and thin with long, stringy hair. It was watching us, its eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment we just stared at each other, frozen. Then it moved fast. It darted back into the trees, disappearing before I could react. I shone the flashlight around, but there was no sign of it. "Did you see that?" Kenton asked, his voice shaking. "Yeah," I replied, my heart pounding. "We need to get out of here." We quickly packed up what we could, deciding to leave the rest. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. We needed to get to safety. As we were finishing, we heard the footsteps again, this time more deliberate, closer. We scrambled into the RV and locked the doors. I started the engine, hands trembling, and we took off down the narrow dirt road. It was a rough ride, the RV bouncing over rocks and potholes, but we didn't care. We just wanted to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached a small town. We found a motel and checked in, both of us still shaken. In the safety of the motel room, we finally allowed ourselves to relax, though sleep was still hard to come by. The next day, we reported what happened to the local authorities. They listened, but it was clear they didn't believe us. Who could blame them? Our story sounded insane, even to us. But we knew what we had seen. We decided to cut our trip short and head home. Neither of us talked much on the drive back, lost in our own thoughts. The experience had left a mark, one that wouldn't fade easily. It was weeks before I could sleep through the night without waking up in a panic. Kenton and I drifted apart after that. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't want to relive it. I buried myself in work, trying to forget, but it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. A few months later, I got a call from Kenton's sister. He had gone back to that campsite alone. She hadn't heard from him in days. The authorities searched, but they never found him. Just his RV, parked in the same spot we had camped, and those same footprints circling the site. I don't know what that thing was, but it's still out there somewhere, and I can't shake the feeling that it's watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself in the Appalachian, camping in a secluded spot, be careful. Sometimes it's not just nature that's out there.